A new window appeared announcing the activation of the Watch Your Language quest, indicating that all swear words would now be subject to this status effect. She sighed in despair. She went to her room, distraught at the idea of monitoring her language, feeling that this request was beyond the capabilities of any modern 21st century person, and she wondered what to do. Meanwhile, she heard a knock at the door before it suddenly burst open. A maid burst into the room and angrily demanded to know what she had been doing all this time. This maid was Charlotte, her personal assistant, who scolded her for staying in bed, even though the sun had risen and was high in the sky. Rowella inwardly remembered that it was indeed her, the cleaning lady. Rowella recalled how Charlotte had seemed angry from the moment she first saw her, and that the situation hadn't changed today. But this situation seemed like the perfect opportunity for Rowella. She saw it as a testing ground for the system window that was still visible before her. She shouted to Charlotte and asked if she could see what she was pointing at. Charlotte was perplexed by her words, wondering what she was talking about, which confirmed to Rowella that only she could see the system window. After finding the answer to her first question, she decided to move on to the next step and test the filtering function. She called Charlotte back with a smile, and the maid greeted her resentfully. When she tried to curse her with a blasphemous word, her mouth was forced to utter the words, "I love," instead. Shocked, she covered her mouth in bewilderment. Rowella realized with horror that the filtering function was working. It really did, and I couldn't believe what had happened. She realized she was in big trouble, especially when Charlotte asked her what she had just said. If the Windows system functions were real, this meant the penalty for not completing the quest was real, too, and it would actually kill him, as she had already seen. But she wondered, confused, about the nature of this filtering and how an insult like, "Are you crazy?" could turn into, "I love you." Realizing this feature was very dangerous, Charlotte sighed, asking her mistress if she had really lost her mind. Then she added that she was afraid Rowella would get involved. Later, she thought she was pretending to be crazy, justifying it by being subjected to a large sum of money. This scam was maddening. She reassured her, telling her not to worry. Then Charlotte approached to reveal that the fact she had been swindled was a secret only she knew at the palace, and that she was prepared to remain silent forever, provided Rowella gave her a little pocket money. Rowella froze as she sensed the threat, then realized she might have already been the victim of a scam orchestrated by a certain Organ Sebit. She remembered Organ's story, how she had met him through Demos, the man she had fallen instantly in love with. Organ had courted her beforehand, revealing his true intentions. He offered her an investment opportunity in a mine he claimed contained valuable minerals, promising to triple her investment. Because of her trust in Demos, Rowella didn't bother to check out the Oregon mine and fell for his sweet talk. To try and impress Dios, she secretly used her father's name to secure the investment funds. But the result was Spurt's betrayal and his absconding with the money. She didn't find out until later that he was expelled from her family register due to his gambling addiction. Rowella couldn't say. Someone knew what had happened. She was ashamed and frightened because she had been scammed several times before, and her father had always borne the burden of her debts. The Duke had warned her last time about when he would stop supporting her financially if she invested recklessly again. And now that she had caused trouble in another incident, she was sure he wouldn't tolerate it this time. Furthermore, there was another person who should never find out about this affair: demonstrations. That person was Killian Demos, Rowella's unrequited love and the true hero of the original story. Demonstrations had been insistent with Rowella, showing her the interest she aroused. He showered her with sweet words and gifts, even though, to him, these were merely insignificant favors. However, they weren't that numerous. But when he realized that Rowella had fallen in love with him, his attitude towards her completely changed. He began by exploiting her feelings, questioning how much she loved him and why she hesitated to invest her money in him. He kept reminding her that he had given her everything without expecting anything in return, and that she couldn't do anything without him, leaving her in a state of confusion and disorientation. Then he coldly left her, blaming her for his change and demanding she find a solution herself. The demos had a strange way of twisting facts and making Roella look like the guilty one. But Roella didn't doubt him for a second. Instead, she blamed only herself. She kept telling herself that he had changed because of her and her shortcomings. And she feared he would be. I would be disappointed in her again if she failed in this investment, wondering how she could live afterward. Roella, I didn't know then that the real reason the swindler Organ Sebet was able to deceive her was at the instigation of Demos himself. After the swindle, Roella was drowning in guilt, and in the midst of it all, the maid Charlotte discovered the truth and began to blackmail her, threatening to tell the Duke everything if she didn't provide her with some pocket money and that she would go to him immediately if Roella refused his demands. The current Roella observed Charlotte behaving arrogantly. She had amassed a fortune, as always, at the idea of blackmailing her. But she thought this blackmail wouldn't work on her anymore, because everything that controlled the original Roella meant nothing to her anymore. That she had taken possession of her body. The demos that the original Roella adored, she didn't care about, and the Duke she feared meant nothing to her. She, who had been abandoned by her parents in her previous life. For this reason, she realized that she was the only one with the knowledge of the original story capable of saving Roella from the shackles of the original plot. Suddenly, the systems. A voice resonated in her head. She decided that, given her current status, she had to act, even if it was only to complete these ridiculous tasks. A new tutorial quest appeared before her, describing Charlotte, an evil servant who exploits the weaknesses of others and manipulates them. And the mission was to reform the villains, the good Charlotte. The reward for success was an increase in reputation, coins, and a special stat with a 120-hour timer. Although she had considered it, she had calculated that the rewards were good. This was the first quest she'd actually enjoyed. I was thinking about how to handle Charlotte, anyway. She remembered Charlotte blackmailing Roella for money and valuables, so she figured since she was the villain, she could be a little harsh. She imagined yelling at Charlotte and threatening her with death, which would make the maid present herself with fear. Seeing that this approach required a strong personality, the system interrupted her with a new quest entitled, Just and Kind Words, and thus the system's sensitivity to vulgarity was high. She was therefore shocked that even these threats were considered impiety. The warning kept appearing, making her wonder angrily if this sensitivity level was too low. She wondered, perplexed, if it would be possible for someone to hit her instead, but another message immediately appeared stating that violence is wrong and asking her to try to resolve the issue amicably. She was extremely angry about the repeated violence, which conveyed a bad message, and I wondered how she was supposed to resolve the problem amicably. Her opponent treated her with contempt and was even forbidden from frightening her. So, how could she reform herself? She sighed and decided to stop, angry at the system. Summarizing her situation, she had reformed a perverse opponent, but in a way that didn't seem violent to anyone. And then she decided she had no choice but to use this characteristic. In the original version of this story, Charlotte aspired to the life of an aristocrat and was obsessed with luxury goods. So, the jewels she had blackmailed meant a lot to her, and she knew it very well. Roella, who fell into her trap, was so tense he couldn't have uttered a word. This is exactly what the new Roella decided to exploit. She devised a plan by giving Charlotte a glittering appearance and accessories, and making her behave submissively, as if she were powerless to satisfy a servant's desire for nobility, and to satisfy her sense of superiority. Thus, over time, Charlotte would forget her place and neglect her duties, leading to rumors spreading among the servants that she wasn't working. Eventually, the news would reach the Duke's ears, and then dealing with someone like Charlotte would be easy, and the problem would be over. But Rowella wondered about the extent of the system's flexibility for such a plan. She decided to first test the system's precise standards. So she called Charlotte, who was surprised by her sudden invitation. Rowella began her plan with a subtle insult, telling Charlotte that her way of thinking was pure, and that she possessed a beauty similar to Snow White's, which in reality meant that she was empty-headed, sowing confusion in Charlotte's mind. She didn't understand his intention. Then the system's voice boomed, and Rowella realized that speaking at this level of indirect insults fell within the category of permissible values. She smiled triumphantly, and while Charlotte was still wondering about the meaning of Snow White, she went back to inquire about pocket money. As mentioned earlier, Rowella opened a jewelry box, expressing her gratitude to Charlotte for keeping her secret this time. Then she offered it to her. Charlotte could choose what she wanted from the box, even take everything if she wished, thinking it was the bait she would throw to Charlotte. Make her follow her plan to the letter. Charlotte was shocked and asked if she could truly have anything she wanted. Rowella replied in the affirmative, provided she kept it a secret. Rowella asked if the jewelry had attracted attention, which only increased the maid's excitement. After a brief hesitation, Charlotte couldn't resist and accepted the offer, thanking her mistress. Charlotte clutched the box tightly to her chest, filled with immense happiness, confirming that she would certainly keep the secret. Rowella watched her ponder her greed, then told her she was counting on her. Then she surprised her again, by offering her an extra ring. Rowella explained that this ring was expensive and popular among nobles these days, and she knew in her heart it was more valuable than everything in the jewelry box combined. This ring was the same as Rowella's, received from the high priest after being recognized as a saint, and Charlotte's presence would be irrefutable proof that she had blackmailed her with her valuables. Charlotte, overwhelmed with happiness, expressed her admiration for the ring. So, Rowella encouraged her to wear it, thinking the maid had no idea. This ring was dangerous, especially since she had it before coming to the palace. Meanwhile, Rowella noticed other cleaning women in the hallway because it was cleaning time. She realized that witnesses had been found. She asked Charlotte to stop working and end her life. The cleaning lady was surprised because she hadn't yet cleaned the room. Rowella convinced her it was best not to work for fear she might lose her jewelry, and another cleaning lady could do it. So, Charlotte was convinced. Charlotte left, saying she was busy and Rowella would take care of it. She cleaned her room herself. Rowella urged her to hurry up and leave. The two other maids stood in a state of shock, wondering what had happened. I just saw her. Rowella approached them and asked for their help cleaning the room, explaining that Charlotte had left to go home without doing her chores. The two maids were surprised, but they immediately agreed to help their young mistress. Whispers began to be exchanged between them. One noticed that the room hadn't been cleaned at all, while the other murmured that Charlotte must have blackmailed another young woman. Then, Rowella smiled. A sly smile, realizing the situation was easy since the rumors concerning Charlotte's lack of sincerity were already widespread. Rowella was convinced that the news would. The disease spread quickly, and she felt that it had started well. Now, she wondered with a triumphant smile, was it time to move on to the next step? A few days later, two servants were seen whispering and exchanging remarks about what they had recently heard and seen concerning the young lady. The two servants passed on the news about the chaos reigning in their mistress's room, concluding that her personal maid was no longer performing her cleaning duties. They also noticed that the lady's appearance, particularly her hairstyle and clothing, seemed disheveled and neglected. The young woman appeared to be in a state of neglect, as if she were only concerned with herself, which aroused the servants' pity. But they dared not intervene or help her without an explicit order from her superior. In addition to this neglect, it was observed that the young woman had become isolated, spending most of her time in the library, where she continued to read books without energy or any apparent vitality. These conversations reached the butler's ears as he passed through the corridor, where the servants interpreted her retreat into books as an attempt to escape her heavy heart, leading them to believe the rumors circulating about her were actually true. The servants were surprised when their whispers began. The conversation was interrupted by a sudden question about what they meant by rumors. The one asking the question was the head butler, who stepped before them with a calm smile, triggering terror and causing them to stammer at the sight of him. The head butler justified his intervention by stating that it was his duty to monitor the young woman's affairs, then politely asked them to inform him of the nature of these rumors they were discussing. At the same time, the young woman was sitting in the library as usual for the previous days, while some servants watched her from a distance, wondering if she had really come just to read, especially since the affair had lasted several days. The servants were on guard against each other, worried that she might hear them, noting that she had come alone today as well, without any of her usual guards or servants who accompanied her. They expressed their deep regret for her condition, considering it unfortunate for someone in her position to fall under the control and manipulation of a wicked servant, and sadly wondered what they could do to help her. Meanwhile, a faint and confident smile had appeared on the young woman's face, a sign of her satisfaction with the spread of these rumors among the servants, exactly as she had foreseen. Her main objective from then on was to announce the news of her current miserable situation, which was spreading to every corner of the palace to such an extent that it guaranteed this news would finally reach the ears of the Duke himself. Her plan was maintained, moving at a steady pace for several consecutive days, as she regularly did. She preserved her disheveled appearance and the chaos in her room, reinforcing her image as a persecuted victim. In contrast, her servant was consumed by the ecstasy of acquiring more jewels and valuables. She increased her loot with joy and greed. With the continued spread of rumors circulating throughout the Duke's palace, and their gradual expansion, the plan unfolded smoothly, encountering none of the aforementioned obstacles. Since everyone whispered these rumors in secret, behind the greedy servant's back, she remained unaware of what was happening around her, and continued her behavior with utter recklessness, and without any concern. The young woman was certain that persisting in her greed would be accomplished when news of the Duke spread. She called her personal maid, urging the servants to lower their voices to avoid revealing their secrets. The young woman turned silently, curious, trying to listen carefully to what the servants were saying and understand the flow of events. Her doubts were confirmed when she heard the chambermaids talking about the head butler. We had already asked them about this. He confirmed that the news was true. He had finally reached the Duke. As soon as the news that the Duke had summoned the maid arrived, it reached the young girl's ears. She closed her book, her words suggesting satisfaction and victory. Let's go back a few hours. The Duke was in his study, seriously considering the strange news that had recently begun to circulate in his palace. The Duke inquired of the butler about the nature of this rumor, and the latter respectfully replied that there were strong suspicions among the servants, stating, "The young woman is being blackmailed by her personal maid." The Duke expressed his firm condemnation of the idea, wondering mockingly if it was reasonable for him to believe that a girl was being blackmailed in complete silence, given how difficult it was to believe. The head waiter noticed the Duke's reaction, his refusal to believe the story, which was entirely predictable. The head waiter explained that he himself had initially considered the question absurd, knowing that the young woman's personality was closer to that of someone who threatens others, not someone who is threatened. But he went on to add in his speech that there were other unusual developments, reminding the Duke of reports he had recently received about his daughter's repeated visits to the library, a behavior she had not previously been accustomed to. The Duke downplayed the significance of this change in her behavior, assuming that this act was nothing more than a desperate attempt to attract attention, as she had done on previous occasions. But the butler, he denied this possibility, explaining that after several days of surveillance, it turned out that the situation was different this time. Her excessive spending declined and her interest in exaggerated ornaments ceased, and she suddenly transformed into a calm and wise person, questioning the lack of cruel behavior recently received about her. And this report shed light on what had happened. The Duke must carefully consider that things are indeed calm for a while, unlike usual, with daily reports about her. The transgressions reached them. The butler added that at first, he too did not believe these rumors, but the numerous witnesses associated with them made them impossible to ignore or dismiss as mere meaningless gossip. He suggested to the Duke that it would be best to conduct a thorough investigation. The inquiry into this matter must continue. He continued, while the Duke remained silent, listening with interest. The Duke sighed deeply, considering the matter, then nodded in approval. He acted on the butler's suggestion and gave strict orders to bring the personal housekeeper implicated in these rumors to his office immediately. Only a few moments passed before the maid, Charlotte, stopped in front of the Duke, and signs of tension and confusion appeared on her face, as she asked him in a trembling voice why he had summoned her. Anxious questions swirled in her mind. Charlotte pondered this sudden reason for the summons, especially since the Duke rarely requested to meet with servants. She personally and directly liked this. The Duke initiated her by asking her to confirm her identity, then told her the purpose of his summons, which was to verify the veracity of the rumor recently circulating in the palace, which caused her astonishment mixed with confusion as to what this rumor was. The Duke glared at her. A piercing, frightening stare confronted her directly with the rumor, claiming that he was blackmailing the young woman and exploiting her to steal her valuables. Charlotte flinched violently, her eyes widening in shock and terror, as she heard these grave accusations directed at her. She waved her hands. Panicked, she denied having committed any such act and confirmed that these rumors were nothing but lies and slander. But the Duke was not easily convinced and demanded that she provide any evidence to prove her innocence and the truth of her claim. Charlotte stammered and didn't answer while she swore. Her luck in keeping her secret, and her panicky wonder at how the Duke could have discovered her affair. She ruled out, in her mind, that the young woman was the only one who had informed the Duke because she was also cowardly enough to reveal herself and admit to causing problems. Remembering how she begged her to keep her secret in exchange for a precious necklace, the maid gritted her teeth. Resentment washed over her, and she concluded that someone had betrayed her, anxiously wondering if anyone had seen her taking the jewelry. And she resolved in her heart of hearts to deny everything. Initially, I bet Rowella would never want to reveal her misdeeds. Therefore, she would help her insist on her innocence and deny these accusations. She felt it necessary to act with greater immunity and confidence in this situation. So, she confirmed again that it was a false rumor, and boldly asserted that there was someone capable of proving her innocence. And she asked with complete confidence, summoning the young lady for testimony, confirming that she would prove his innocence. The butler whispered in the Duke's ear, asking about the next step, and explaining that he had already sent someone to search the maid's room, and that the truth of his conviction or innocence would be revealed soon. In any case, things would soon be resolved. And the Duke began to make his decision based on this, but he was interrupted by the door bursting open with force and momentum, as a young woman suddenly appeared and burst into the room. Rowella entered panting and startled her. Her breathing became labored, and signs of despair and panic appeared on her face as she announced aloud that she had something to say. The Duke, the butler, and Charlotte were surprised by this sudden entrance, and the Duke uttered the girl's name in surprise, while the maid was shocked to see her in this state. Rowella noticed the tension in the room and smiled mischievously at her secret after realizing that Charlotte had revealed nothing. The whole secret was still kept and seemed truly comfortable because the course of events was still in her favor. And Rowella wanted to seize the whole scene. So, she dramatically threw herself to her knees on the floor and began to apologize to her father in a tearful voice, claiming that everything that had happened was her fault alone. The participants were stunned by the force of her fall to such an extent that they thought her knees were broken, while Charlotte remained in a state of complete astonishment, as she called her teacher, confused by her strange behavior. Rowella pretended to cry and she collapsed, cleverly believing that her prior admission of being the victim of fraud and blackmail would sway the situation entirely in her favor, knowing her father would never forget that his daughter was subjected to such suffering. Then she asked him if the reason for his invocation of Charlotte was this spreading of rumors. And she continued her invented story sobbing, confirming to her father the truth of everything that reached his ears and admitted to being the victim of a serious fraudulent operation, and that Charlotte had exploited this situation as a means of blackmailing her, which sounded like a flash of lightning struck the shocked maid's head. The Duke turned to the maid with a furious, disapproving look, confirming the rumors were true. Rowella added that she hadn't been able to speak, fearing the maid would continue to take her valuables. Panic overwhelmed Charlotte, and she approached her mistress, pleading with her to clarify the situation. She reminded her that it was she who had willingly given the gifts and begged her to answer and tell her. The father revealed the truth to exonerate her. In the midst of this deteriorating situation, one of the knights entered, interrupting the conversation, and informed the Duke that they had finished searching the chambermaid's room as planned, and that they had found something. And the knight opened a box full of sparkling jewels and explained to the Duke that they had found inside belongings believed to have belonged to the damsel. Among them was the precious ring given to her by the high priest. Charlotte's eyes widened. She was filled with terror and shock at the mere mention of the high priest's ring. And she cried out in disapproval, confirming that she hadn't touched anything, just as she hadn't before in her life. She didn't realize the extent of the trap that had so cleverly ensnared her. The maid was in shock, sweat beading profusely on her face as she glared at the precious ring, unable to believe her eyes. At that moment, the young woman seized the opportunity to begin her charade. While screaming at the top of her lungs, she apologized to her father, the Duke, which only increased the servant's confusion. Perplexity was evident behind her. And the lady continued her entirely fabricated performance, sobbing, feigning deep regret, and declaring that she had utterly failed to be a noble lady and a good saint. Because instead of telling her father the truth and convincing the servant to admit her mistake, she allowed herself to submit to his blackmail. The Duke looked at her sternly and told her, "We'll come back to her mistakes later," pointing a piercing finger at the greedy servant. The priority now is to expel the rat that has sneaked into the palace. In secret, the lady asked, bidding farewell to her servant in a cold tone, considering that getting rid of her was an unfortunate, but unavoidable step in order to complete her mission. Immediately, 2 knights stepped forward, and she seized the servant forcefully to pull her outside on the Duke's orders. As she screamed in terror and begged them for a moment to explain her position, the maid continued, listening to her cries and pleas with the Duke, admitting her mistake and promising she would become a good person from now on. Meanwhile, the young woman remained kneeling on the floor, watching the scene in silence. In the midst of this chaos, the lady concealed a malicious smile behind her face. She held her hands, feigning sadness, thinking that the maid should stop plotting ways to stab people in the back and start living a decent life. Their paths would never cross again. With the massive doors closing after the maid's eviction, the lady realized that the problem had finally been solved, and only her father remained before her now, who stood haughtily and gazing. He looked at her with a serious and resolute expression, awaiting an explanation of what had happened. The lady immediately reverted to her old self and began by tearfully confessing that she had invested her money with Count Sebit's second son, but the man had swindled her and run off with the money. The Duke was surprised by the name, pointing out that this man had already been struck off the register, according to the family records, due to his misconduct. The lady continued her account, weeping, admitting her imprudence and haste, acknowledging that she hadn't discovered the truth until it was too late, and adding timidly, by the time she realized the situation, she had guaranteed an amount equivalent to her financial allowance for 3 months, which shocked the Duke and the butler, as she was. Knowing in her secret that he must be, she was stunned, especially since he had warned her. He had repeatedly opposed the use of her family name and guaranteed considerable sums of money. The lady thought deep down that, from a technical point of view, she is also considered a victim in this story. But now that she's embodying the character of Roella, with her bad reputation, she has no choice but to bravely bear the consequences. So she raised her head and offered a sincere and heartfelt apology to her father, the Duke, who seemed somewhat surprised by her sincere tone. The Duke sighed, placing his hand on his brow, which was creased with fatigue, and then asked her if she had paid the swindler the full guaranteed amount. The lady noticed that his voice was calmer and gentler than she would have expected in such a situation. She replied that she was paying most of the amount by selling her luxury goods and jewels, and only a little remained, to which the Duke agreed with understanding. Then he surprised her by offering to pay the remaining portion for herself, having her jump into her place depending on the severity of the shock. The Duke questioned her exaggerations and asked her if there was any reaction. Something was wrong. So she corrected the question. The matter quickly arose in her secret, confirming that she was extremely grateful for his offer. But she hadn't expected him to intervene to pay off her debts with such speed and ease. The Duke warned her. We formally oppose the repetition of this mistake. Confirming what had happened was enough. And as a warning to be more careful in the future, he decided to suspend her financial allowance for only 3 months, which made her wonder if the punishment had been any lighter than what was mentioned in the original novel. In the original story, Roella, she received a severe reprimand and was deprived of her benefits for 6 months. She therefore concluded that her childhood confession of guilt before being exposed might be the reason for the reduced punishment. Whatever the reason, the Duke having changed his mind, she smiled with satisfaction. Considering that this development was not at all bad for her, and for the unfolding of her plan, she bowed forcefully until she almost hit her head on the ground, humbly announcing her acceptance of his decision, which caused beads of sweat to appear on the butler's face, who feared she might injure herself, protecting herself from the force of the bow. The Duke was slightly surprised by her, and told her she could leave if she understood the situation, so she answered him with obedience and vigor. Before leaving, she stood up and smiled kindly, promising to reflect on her actions from now on, and expressed her sincere thanks to her father for staying by her side and helping her rebuild her life. Repeated mistakes. Duke's features softened, and he addressed her by the title of father for the first time at that moment, asking her to go and rest. So, I thanked him again with gratitude and respect. After she left, the Duke turned to his head of staff, Graham, wondering in a low voice if he noticed that the girl seemed to have changed. Graham interrupted him with a warm smile, confirming that he too saw she had already changed somewhat for the better. The Duke agreed with the butler's observation, pointing out that he had noticed this change in his own daughter as well. The Duke cleared his throat, trying to hide his feelings. However, the butler clearly noticed the pride and prestige etched on his master's face. But the Duke soon cautioned himself against raising his expectations unnecessarily, considering the possibility that his daughter was merely feigning maturity to overcome this crisis. He remembered the many disappointments that followed each time he hoped she would change. And the memories took him back to his childhood, when she was his beloved daughter and the apple of his eye, whose education he nurtured. He devoted his heart to compensating for the absence of her late mother. And he remembered how a chasm had grown between them. This made her seem distant from him until she became this arrogant girl. She is now. For this reason, he had made it his mission to be stricter with her, hoping for her return to the right path. Despite this, he wondered to himself if the time since it was seeing her cry that she took care of herself. He was thinking more today than usual. I also noticed that she looked much thinner than before. Then he grabbed his cane and, in a loud voice, angrily repeated the problem of his swindle. And he gave a firm order to his head butler to issue a search warrant for this fraudster so that he could inquire whether he was talking about Count Cert's second son. The Duke angrily confirmed this and struck the ground forcefully with his cane, condemning the audacity of this young criminal to swindle his daughter and the lady of the Breda family, and ordered him to put up a financial reward for his capture as soon as possible, threatening to find him and punish him severely in revenge for the honor of the family. The head waiter bowed respectfully and smiled, confirming that he would carry out her orders immediately. Later that night, in the girl's room, the system's window appeared to announce the success of the educational mission after the maid Charlotte admitted her mistake and pledged to lead a good life, which pleased Roella with the appearance of the reward window. Finally, Roella considered the rewards, which included reputation points, coins, and special stat bonuses, finding them very good, and then wondered if she could check her current reputation level. Immediately, a new window appeared before her. She was amazed at the speed of the response systems. But she was struck by the fact that her reputation level had reached 9 points, in addition to 6 more. She remembered her initial reputation was only 3 points, and adding the 3 reward points meant the total should have become 6. She sat there, pondering with utter confusion as to the source of the 3 extra points she had received. The thought crossed her mind that the Duke might be positive. His reaction to her was linked to this increase. But she quickly dismissed the idea entirely, convincing herself that their relationship in the original story was extremely flawed and that it was impossible for her heart to soften with a single excuse. And she finally decided not to worry about it as long as the points kept increasing. She then tried to figure out how to use the special stats and coins she had earned. But the system informed her that this function is not currently available. And she wondered with surprise if the reason for her unavailability was synonymous with a bad reputation. She concluded that everything in this system essentially depends on reputation. And she realized with enthusiasm that building a good reputation must be her top priority. But she felt frustrated by her inability to do anything at the moment, describing the system as unhelpful. However, she thought about the conditions imposed by the system, such as preventing insults and building a good reputation, and she felt strange, as if the system was constantly pushing her to the limit. Being a person of high moral character. And I wondered if this moral orientation was linked to the ultimate goal mentioned earlier by the system. She lay on her bed, grumbling, admitting her inability to understand due to the lack of information available to her. She finally decided to be patient and wait, confirming to herself that information gathering was the top priority, whether for the purpose of completing missions or ensuring her survival in this world. And she yawned, feeling drowsy after the tension had dissipated. She decided to rest and sleep well after completing her mission successfully. The next morning, there was a knock at her bedroom door to wake her. The voices of 2 new maids, Mary and Jane, asked permission to enter to help her prepare for the morning, so she allowed them in with a sleepy tone. As soon as the 2 maids entered, they were fixed in their places and the young woman screamed in terror and astonishment. Roella awoke to the sound of the 2 new servants' shouts and explained her tired appearance to them, saying that she simply hadn't slept well the previous night. However, the 2 maids, Mary and Jane, expressed their concern, believing that what she had done because of the previous housekeeper, Charlotte, was the cause of her exhaustion. They promised to take good care of her from now on. So, I could only thank them warmly. But the real reason for her anxiety wasn't Charlotte, but the system window that popped up in front of her. She didn't know exactly when that window appeared, but she was certain it hadn't been there before she fell asleep last night, and it carried a new hidden quest, inviting her to collect donations and present them at the temple with the promise of returning 110% of the donation's value in coins. In addition to an increase in reputation was built up by reaching certain amounts, with the possibility of legally exchanging those coins for real money, and a warning against misusing the system. It seemed the quest had already been accepted. The fact that the quest had already been accepted excited her. She was confused and wondered if she had, unconsciously pressed the accept button in her sleep. Despite her confusion, she realized that the terms of the quests were very good, as they would not only allow her to recover the entire donation amount, but also make a 10% profit with the option to convert the coins into real money. Happiness washed over her as she imagined the scene, describing it to herself, comparing herself to a safe and high-yield investment. A deposit account with a 10% interest rate and no limits. And she admitted that if she had been fully awake, she wouldn't have made a donation, especially given her financial situation. I hesitated for a moment before accepting it. The offer was tempting. But she quickly hit reality, wondering with confusion about the source of the funds, especially given her financial situation. The allocations had been suspended for 3 months. Even though there wasn't a specific deadline for the quest, I understood that this also meant it could end suddenly, at any time. So, it was best to complete it as quickly as possible. It wasn't all about the money, though. The real key was speeding up your reputation to reach the end of the story and unlock the hidden quest rewards. And only then, as she thought, smiling happily, would she finally be able to begin the glorious life she had always dreamed of as a completely unemployed person. Her dreams were interrupted by the maid's voice announcing the arrival of a guest. She wondered about his identity. After a moment's reflection, she decided it was best to verify the matter herself, as the guest might have a connection to the original Rowella, and she ordered him to be allowed in. A woman with red hair and a luxurious red dress, he entered and addressed Rowella directly, expressing in seemingly kind terms his regret at her deteriorating health, but she sarcastically insinuated that these minor ailments would have been nothing if she possessed a greater, more holy power. Rowella immediately realized that it was her cousin, Helena. This relative and rival, who had appeared briefly in the original story, possessed blood-red eyes and hair, and an arrogant attitude that belied her sweet words. The reason for their bitter rivalry lay in the fact that Helena was constantly prone to provoking conflicts with Rowella in order to gain the favor of her uncle, the Duke of Britta. Helena's tricks consisted of cleverly provoking Rowella, making her pretend to fall and claim that Rowella had pushed her. She would then make her cry and play the victim, asking in a broken voice how much Rowella hated her. All the while, Rowella would scream, trying to defend herself and deny the accusation. The servants would be, she murmured, she had always despised Helena. And not a day could pass without a scene. The affair always ended with Duke's intervention, ordering Rowella to put an end to this uproar and apologize immediately. Rowella would comply with the order while Helena concealed a ruse. A victorious smile. Thus, thanks to these methods, Helena always succeeded in making Rowella appear to be the aggressor. Whereas the original Rowella, who wasn't as cunning as her cousin, fell into the trap of her provocations and always bore the consequences, without even realizing the true reason for her being targeted. For this reason, the original Rowella could only hate her more. Even though Helena herself had no good reason for her harassment, except for her desire to make a good impression on the Duke, which she confirmed when she boasted about the new dress her uncle had bought her, describing him as a kind man. Then she directed her provocation at Rowella, wondering if her uncle was as kind to her. Fully aware that Rowella's relationship with her father was strained, despite the tension, her clear objective was to ignite her jealousy and emphasize that she had lost his favor to the point of never seeing him again. "I didn't even get any new dresses." But the current Rowella regarded the whole situation with disdain. Considering Helena's actions to be extremely childish, she decided it was best not to give a child the reaction she desired. So she calmly replied that she wasn't sure. And perhaps the reason was that their relationship as family didn't require him to make any conscious effort or perform any difficult task every time. This calm response confused Helena. So she initiated a defensive question about whether Rowella was implying that the Duke's kindness toward her was just an act, which Rowella calmly denied. Rowella continued her speech, explaining that her father appreciates a generous nature and most likely pays it back. His niece receives a lot of attention, though not to the same extent as he gives his daughter. These words had an impact. Helena was shocked, and her face changed. She blushed as she listened in astonishment. Helena clutched her fan tightly, wondering in confusion as to the source of this. Rowella spoke with sudden confidence, as she knew deep down that the Duke had only sent money, and that she was the one who had bought the dress herself. Helena continued trying to convince herself that if her uncle didn't adore her, he wouldn't have sent her the money. First place. While Rowella had asked her maid to prepare the tea, Helena continued her inner monologue, reassuring herself that her uncle cherished her like a daughter, and perhaps even more than Rowella herself. But Rowella interrupted her thoughts. Calmly, he asked her to leave his room, because she would like to enjoy drinking tea, which surprised Helena. Rowella confirmed her request calmly. She smiled, repeating that she wanted some rest in her house and a private room, and for that reason, she asked her to leave. Helena exploded with anger. This unexpected situation was unlike anything she had experienced before, as she was used to Rowella losing her temper at the slightest provocation. Then she wondered about the cause of this strange calm she possessed today. Then an idea, a thought, crossed her mind, accompanied by a sly smile. An expression appeared on her face when she remembered that there was a simple way to break Rowella's artificial calm, which was by mentioning the name Demos Killian. Helena immediately changed her demeanor and claimed she had come today to investigate. Rowella then told her there were rumors circulating. She explained that the Duke had issued a search warrant for Sebit's second son, and she had heard the reason was that Rowella was the victim of a scam at his hands, which excited Rowella's apparent surprise. Helena then laughed. Her secret, savoring his reaction. Rowella wondered to herself if her father had gone this far. Helena considered it a sign of her planned success. She thought Rowella might have believed for a moment that her relationship with the Duke had improved. But this news proved that he was still on Helena's side, and she was preparing to drop her next bombshell. Helena revealed that the young Duke Demos Killian, whom Rowella had been relentlessly pursuing, had already learned all about this incident. She eagerly awaited the look of disappointment on Rowella's face, who did indeed seem surprised, but Rowella remained calm and sipped her tea, saying that she understood the situation, then coldly wondered about Demos's relationship with her. Helena was completely surprised by this answer, and felt confused and disoriented. She wondered about the reason for Rowella's calmness, when she had expected her to be begging her at that moment. Rowella put down the cup of tea, and decided to clarify to Helena that she had misunderstood things. She explained to him logically that this was the reason her father had issued a search warrant. It was a clear decision signaling that the swindlers shouldn't dare underestimate their family, and that this was his way of protecting them. Then, with a confident smile, she wondered if she should consider Helena's opinion that spreading such rumors was an insult directed at the Duke's house itself. Helena was shocked and scoffed at the idea, considering it impossible, as everyone in the Empire knew Roella's relationship with the Duke was strained, and the notion that he was warning others to protect her was pure fantasy. But despite her inner denial, doubt began to creep in, to insinuate itself into her heart, and she wondered if Roella's words could truly be true. The doubt quickly turned to real fear when she realized that if she was right, it could mean she herself would lose the Duke's favor. Helena tried to back down, her nervousness palpable. She laughed, claiming she was simply worried about him and had come to tell him about it initially out of kindness. Roella accompanied her with a gentle smile, praising Helena's kind heart and intelligence. But as soon as Helena turned to leave, Roella approached her and whispered, warning her that she at least wouldn't be foolish enough to gossip elsewhere when she was just doing something. Helena stammered, confirming she wouldn't, of course, and she promised to keep quiet. Roella smiled with satisfaction and said she could leave now. Helena left, seething with anger, wondering how she had ended up in this situation. Roella managed to keep her composure until the end. Helena gritted her teeth as she realized that, in the end, she was the only one who had been manipulated, and wondered how that girl had dared do that to her. Helena thought spitefully about how to return the insult she had received. And just then, her maid interrupted her thoughts to tell her about an incoming message. Helena wondered about the message, and the maid confirmed that it was indeed her. A look of shock and surprise washed over Helena. She eagerly snatched the message from the right hand. And after seeing its contents, a sly smile spread across her face as she realized her opportunity had presented itself. She saw in this a message offering her an opportunity for revenge, promising Roella that she would see how long this artificial calm she possessed today would last. Meanwhile, Roella sat at the dining table with her father, the Duke, in a strange atmosphere, as he had suddenly summoned her to share a meal with him, something that hadn't happened in a long time. A feeling of strangeness and unease took hold. She took control, and the atmosphere seemed tense and awkward, to such an extent that she felt she might suffer from indigestion. This increased her confusion about the fact that they had previously eaten food separately throughout the past period. She anxiously wondered if he had invited her to scold him about something. It occurred to her that the reason might be Helena. So she imagined that Helena might have rushed to complain to the Duke after their last confrontation, and remembered how confidently Helena had spoken of her father's intention to protect her. She admitted to herself that she had acted impulsively at the time, and had never confirmed the Duke's true intentions. However, her father hadn't uttered a single word since the beginning of the meal, leading her to wonder if he had actually eaten, and if she had been invited to dine only with him. She decided not to remain in a state of anticipation, and that she should test his mood first. She then sketched a business. She smiled and thanked him for his invitation, expressing her happiness at having a meal together after a long time. The Duke asked her if she was happy. She was indeed happy, and she confirmed it enthusiastically, adding that the food tasted particularly delicious today. The Duke smiled with relief, thinking to himself that his team leader, Graham, had been just right when he suggested arranging this meal. A few hours earlier, at the Duke's office, he had asked what the commotion outside was about. The butler told him that Lady Helena Duda had come to visit the young woman. The Duke reflected on Helena's insistence on approaching her daughter, even though Roella never allows it. Then Graham addressed the issue of the search. To guarantee, the Duke issued a decree against the fugitive organ and pointed out that it had caused much controversy. He explained that most people believe the warrant was not in the public interest, but it was a measure intended to protect the young lady. He added that the rumor had even reached the ears of the young Duke Killian, and that he had publicly expressed his disappointment towards the young lady. The Duke exploded in anger, mockingly questioning Killian's identity to dare feel disappointment. But the butler reminded him that he himself often expressed his disappointment as well. The Duke justified his position by claiming that Killian was his father, and that this gave him the right to feel that way. The Duke sighed, assuming that Rowella, who was still obsessed with Killian, must have caused a huge commotion again. Upon hearing this rumor, Graham surprised her by denying it, confirming that she hadn't done anything this time. Citing her 2 new personal maids, he explained that she hadn't shown any interest in the rumor. On the contrary, she expressed her regret for the folly of those who spread gossip behind the Duke's back. The Duke was shocked, wondering if Rowella had really said that, because she wasn't just refraining from causing trouble, but had perfectly understood her intentions and gone so far as to criticize the foolish nobles. The Duke remembered how his daughter seemed to be acting with unusual composure since the last incident, and how she had thanked him for correcting his mistakes. He wondered, therefore, if she had truly decided to change. Graham suggested that the young woman might have begun to trust the Duke, especially after he personally intervened to resolve her problem. Over time, and thanks to this trust, and the confidence she had in him, her vision of the surrounding area might have begun to expand. The Duke was deeply touched by the idea that his child had decided to trust and rely on him. He tried to hide his feelings, describing her as mischievous, easily moved, but he expressed his concern that she might open her heart to others too quickly. The head waiter admitted that the young lady's heart must be heavy with turmoil. He therefore suggested to the Duke that he share a dinner with her that night to better understand her feelings. The Duke was surprised by the suggestion, pointing out that years had passed since they had last eaten together. Which was confirmed by Graham, who considered this the main reason for his suggestion. He explained that even if the young woman had opened her heart, it might still be difficult for her to take the initiative to approach him first, so he had to reach out to her. He added that talking to her would allow him to deepen their relationship and understand her feelings. Besides confirming whether she had truly changed him, upon reflection, by killing 2 birds with 1 stone, the Duke was convinced by his chief butler's argument. I saw and found that the question was logical. He therefore gave his order to invite Rowella to dinner that evening. Back at the table, the Duke was thinking that his daughter, in the past, would have stormed off in anger and wondered if she had truly opened her heart. Meanwhile, Rowella reflected that this situation was comparable to a business dinner with her boss, and that she needed to maintain her good humor. She continued. Her speech expressed her happiness at that moment, explaining that she had always wanted to spend time with him, but she avoided it thinking that he hated seeing her, so she felt immense happiness when he started the conversation with her first. The Duke was deeply moved by her words, and suddenly the atmosphere changed, which worried Rowella. She wondered if she had said something wrong. The Duke muttered, in shock, that everything he had done harshly was for her, and that she wanted to be with him but couldn't get close because of him. This made Rowella notice that he was starting to mutter. With a serious expression, Rowella realized the situation was escalating. She had taken the wrong turn and decided to turn back. She was talking about something that could improve her reputation. So, she asked her father if he knew how to make donations to the temple. She explained that she would like to give as a way to atone for her past mistakes, but to her great shame, she didn't really know. The Duke was surprised and asked her if she was serious about making a donation, even though her financial allowance had been cut for a while. She replied that the valuables she owned were remnants of sins she had committed in the past. She therefore wants to get rid of them quickly. Her response sparked admiration among the servants, who were murmuring that the young woman had truly changed. Rowella thus answered those whom repentance should drive to leave until now. But she secretly believed that all of this was actually for the good of accomplishing the mission and at the end. The Duke smiled and told her that regarding the donations, it would be best to ask the new theology professor, who would arrive in a few days. Rowella was shocked to learn of a new professor and realized that this was where Rowella's original past sins would resurface. Nobles typically received their lessons from teachers sent from the temple or from ordinary priests. But thanks to her privilege as a saint, Rowella received individual, special theology lessons from high-ranking priests. Despite this exceptional treatment, the unconventional Rowella replaced her teachers without a second thought, viewing them as tools to be discarded. She would expel them for trivial reasons, such as disliking their faces, finding their voices annoying, or the class boring. Her actions were so odious that many of the high-ranking priests who left the school must fill an entire truck. Thus, after her previous head priest escaped her tyranny not so long ago, a new teacher was once again appointed to replace her. This made her think with despair that at that moment, the rate at which she would eventually reach the highest existing priest was. The Duke interrupted her thoughts, warning her and asking if she knew what the teacher's number was without having to say it. So she answered immediately with a yes. She reassured him, saying that it wouldn't happen again, and he promised she would attend his classes regularly from now on. Rowella told herself she couldn't allow her reputation, which was about to collapse because of something like this and that, to be ruined. This was the perfect opportunity to make a good impression not only on the Duke, but also on the temple and within the Grand Temple. One of the priests asked another priest named Victor where he was on his way out, explaining that it wasn't the direction of the prayer hall. Victor replied that he would begin going to the Duke of Breda's palace starting today, and therefore wouldn't be able to attend the prayer service. The other priest realized he had been appointed a professor of theology for the saint, and it seemed as if a new victim had appeared. Victor wondered about the reaction. So his colleague asked him if he hadn't done it. Known something about the saint. So he and she began to recite to him how she was always late for class, and wore colorful dresses, and jewelry and serious theology lessons, and never opened her books. On the contrary, she complains about the priests' faces or their voices, which are matters that have nothing to do with the lesson. And he wondered about the number of innocent priests who had already fallen victim to her, expressing his disbelief that someone could be a saint. So, Victor, I calmly wondered if that was true. A colleague reassured him, saying that it was probably not the longest period ever endured by someone so far. It had only lasted a week, and asked him to consider the question of who has been suffering for some time. He had been suffering for a few days, then come back. The priest wished his colleague Victor Hyperion good luck as he walked away. Victor, I thought, hearing stories about a saint who doesn't act like one had piqued my curiosity. What kind of person is Saint Rowella? Meanwhile, Rowella arrived for lessons. Arrive early. Realizing that simply arriving on time wouldn't be enough to demonstrate her change, given that the original Rowella was always late, she knew it. The temple must be full of complaints about her past bad behavior, and any conflict with that now would put her in an embarrassing position. Luckily for her, a new theology professor arrived just in time, and she saw this as an opportunity to show them that the vagabond Saint Rowella had. I finally turned the page, and opened a new one. So, she sat down, pretending to read with a calm smile, although she didn't know anything about the book's contents. As time went on, she grew bored and wondered what was causing the slow passage of time, since there were still 2 hours left before class started, and she suggested that the teacher hadn't arrived yet. But she convinced herself that she had no other choice to prove her change. So I decided to use this time to think about the donation mission that appeared in the system window. She had to make a donation to the temple to complete the mission. And for that, she needed money. Even if she sold all her jewelry, her supplies would run out quickly, especially since she had already given some to Charlotte. She wondered if there was another way to collect a large sum of money safely and legally. But nothing. This thought came to her, as she confirmed the absence of lotteries in this world, and wished her gold coins could multiply on their own. As she was lost in thought, a coin slipped from her hands. She grabbed it from her hand, and it fell into the nearby stream. She screamed in panic because of her lost money. She felt utterly hopeless for a moment, as she was already suffering from financial difficulties. But she quickly reassured herself, thinking that at least it had fallen into a fountain and not a sewer. Suddenly, an idea flashed through her mind. Spirit. It was a wishing fountain, and I wondered how she hadn't thought of it before. She decided to create a fountain of her own. Just because wishing fountains exist in the modern world doesn't mean they can't exist elsewhere. Be one of them here. She saw that the problem isn't just about money, but also about people who can't usually come to the temple, but can pray at the fountain and make small donations. Coins will suffice. Lowering the financial burden will make donations accessible to all segments of society, and if people's prayers and coins combine, the total amount collected will eventually become significant. The saint in the end is merely a messenger for the people. Prayers and the construction of a fountain in the saint's name and deliverance, along with donations to the temple, seemed to her the ideal solution. She set her first goal, which was the construction of the fountain, and eagerly awaited her lottery fountain. She thought the cost of the fountain could be covered by selling jewelry. And what really matters is determining where to place it and how to distribute it. She heard the news about it. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She then realized that the professor had arrived. The teacher was Father Victor, who was initially surprised by her arrival, then expressed his pleasure at meeting her and introduced himself, as if he were the new theology professor, starting today. He told her that her name was Victor Hyperion. Rowella remained frozen in place, in shock. He was the messenger, according to the original story. A man possessing immense divine power, cold logic, and a heart that embraced people with a warmth that earned him the support of the empire and the temple. And when the true saint later appeared, he became an active supporter of hers and revealed that Rowella was a false saint. He played a crucial role in the story, which meant he could be a dangerous adversary for her. Rowella didn't believe he appeared here in this way. In the original story, he appeared as a messenger, which put her at ease. Rowella noticed that the priest's features weren't hostile, and it occurred to her that, based on his current behavior, he didn't seem to have harbored hatred toward her from the start. She wondered if this was the reason that later led to the original conflict between Rowella and him. And Victor began asking her if something was wrong after he noticed her. Faced with the astonished looks on her face, Rowella decided in her heart to be cautious. Convinced that there was no need to provoke someone who could become an enemy in the future, she gave a quiet laugh and simply replied that there was nothing to worry about. She continued her conversation with a radiant smile. She expressed her eagerness to meet him and offered guidance as an inexperienced student, while reminding herself of the need to focus on her main objective, portraying the role of the perfect student who acts in the best possible way that day. She was determined to make a positive and excellent impression on the new teacher, who simply watched her in silence, his gaze filled with meaning. His politeness was surprising. Winner. I thought the girl didn't seem mean or fierce, as the rumors claimed. So, he decided to monitor her behavior for a longer period before any broadcast. They exchanged a word of judgment and a slight smile with her, saying he was looking forward to learning from her as well. Before proceeding with the formality, Victor asked her if she was going to classes. Aware of the foundation of the empire's background, she replied politely, explaining that she knew the story in general, summarizing it as the appearance of a god to save the world when it had descended into chaos. Victor noticed the superficiality of her answer. He then commented with some frustration that she only knew about seashells, which made Rowella a little uncomfortable, justifying it to herself, as the original novel hadn't explored these aspects in depth. And much more. Victor cleared his throat slightly, suggesting he provide a brief explanation since it was the first day of class. The teacher began reciting history, explaining that at the beginning of the creation of the world and the appearance of humans, there was a delicate balance between the forces of good and evil. But this balance was not maintained. Finally, the evil god Ortub intervened. The human world was at a certain stage that led to the tyranny of evil forces rapidly. And as soon as the balance was restored, chaos engulfed the entire world. Given this imbalance, malevolent forces exploited the opportunity to spread disorder, sowing doubt and mistrust among people so that operations of mutual extermination could begin, transforming the world into what resembles a true hell. In the midst of Luciera descended to Earth, with the goal of saving humanity from its inevitable destruction. Luciera took pity on humans and reached out to them. And she sealed Ahutub's body, soul, and light into darkness, and distributed them to the four directions of the empire: north, south, east, and west. In the end, Luciera was sealed alongside the heart of Ahutub, offering a great sacrifice so that the world could enjoy peace. Rowella interrupted the explanation by raising her hand, asking permission to ask a question. The teacher immediately granted it. Rowella inquired with interest about the heart's fate, noting that it mentioned the division of body, soul, light, and darkness on the four signs, wondering where the heart was specifically sealed. Victor was surprised by his question and paused for a moment, stunned, before turning his face away, stating that there was nothing unusual about his question. The teacher explained that the heart's precise location remains unknown. Luciera hid it to prevent it from falling into the hands of those who might misuse it, despite the existence of assumptions that it is hidden somewhere within the capital. Rowella concluded that the reason for this was that the capital was the center of the empire, as Victor confirmed. She then thought to herself that this capital center was the royal palace, and she contemplated the secret of the fact that most members of the royal family possessed considerable abilities surpassing normal human capabilities. I wondered if this had any connection to the heart of the evil god, and she recalled her information that these abilities were known as blessings, and that the royal family, thanks to them, played the role of guardian of the empire. Rowella murmured softly about these blessed guardians, remembering how Crown Prince Hildian in the original story possessed power superior to any other person. Crown Prince Hildian Kairos was born with the greatest blessing, from the time of the first emperor until the present day, to such an extent that his influence alone was enough to end wars that lasted for years and others for only a few days. He embodied the true model of an emperor who loved his empire, inspiring unwavering confidence that he would become a great emperor and lead the country to glory. Despite this, Rowella realized that no one could predict the future. Just as she hadn't expected her end in her previous life, the powerful prince couldn't have foreseen her tragic fate either, and she sadly wondered if he was truly destined to meet his end under the weight of a deadly curse. In another scene, Hildian appeared disguised in a cloak, accompanied by her men, confirming their arrival at their destination. The next day, as Rowella, her maid, climbed into her carriage, I noticed her mistress's good humor. Rowella smiled broadly, confirming that she was in excellent spirits, because she had finally managed to find a solution to the problem that had long troubled her. And she, in her memory, returned to her dialogue with Professor Victor when she proposed her idea, which would materialize as the construction of a wishing fountain in the capital square. Victor was surprised by her sudden shift from wishing to building a fountain. She then enthusiastically explained to him that people would be able to throw coins in and make a wish, where 1 coin represented happiness, 2 represented luck, and 3 coins guaranteed the wish would come true. Rowella explained to Victor, who was amazed by her idea, that this method would even allow those whose circumstances prevented them from visiting the temple to make a donation while they made a wish, emphasizing that the coins would be used as donations. She continued confidently, smiling, suggesting they use the temple's name to establish this fountain in the capital's square. She added enthusiastically that every coin collected in the fountain would be given entirely to the temple. Thinking to herself, she said that by relinquishing authority, she would be free of all worries and considered herself a genius for devising this plan. She felt a sense of satisfaction when she noticed Victor's positive acceptance of her idea, which convinced her the high priest would accept as soon as he heard it. Indeed, as soon as the lesson ended and Victor returned to the temple, the high priest firmly insisted that Victor should immediately begin work on the fountain project. Meanwhile, Roella walked along with a relaxed smile, thinking that one of them, the problem, had been solved, and there was only one. The matter remained before her. This matter involved selling her jewelry to help cover the cost of building the fountain. So, disguised under a cloak, she headed toward one of the jewelry stores, where the mustachioed owner greeted her, wondering if she was looking for something specific, like gemstones. Roella took out a small package and told him she hadn't come to buy, but to sell precious stones. The merchant looked at her condescendingly, thinking to himself with annoyance at the identity of this girl he had never seen before. Despite this, he felt she was wasting his time. He agreed to take a look, which convinced him that her jewelry wouldn't be valuable given her appearance, and decided to quickly assess her and dismiss her. But as soon as he opened the package, his eyes widened in astonishment and wonder at a gemstone of impeccable purity. Seeing stones of this quality, I wondered, I hadn't seen anything like it in a long time. The merchant wondered to himself, astonished at how a girl like her had received this precious jewel. His shock increased when Roella calmly informed him that she owned other stones, making him jump from his seat, unbelieving. A greedy smile appeared on his face. On the merchant's face. Realizing that this visit had not been a waste of time, but that this customer represented a valuable catch that could not be let go of, he approached her eagerly, wondering if she intended to sell everything at once, which aroused Roella's surprise and weariness due to his sudden enthusiasm. She then asked him if there was a problem with the jewelry. The merchant clarified the situation, explaining that his small shop didn't have the financial capacity to handle such a large quantity of precious jewelry all at once. He instead offered to take her to a renowned jeweler who offered excellent prices, which made Roella hesitate. Go somewhere else. But the merchant reassured her, saying the place wasn't far, and was located just behind the back door of his shop. Roella was thinking she had promised her maid, Jane, to return quickly and hadn't planned to stop anywhere else. But she saw that it was best to finish selling the jewelry quickly while she was out. She accepted his offer based on his confirmation that the distance was short. The merchant then asked her to follow him to guide her to the shop. The merchant smiled suspiciously as he asked her to let him handle it. He led her through dark alleyways, making Roella realize the atmosphere was strange and suspicious, and doubt began to haunt her. She wondered if she had followed the wrong person. The merchant stopped, opened one of the rooms for her, and asked her to wait a few moments until his boss arrived. So Roella wondered, confused and worried, about her intention with the word boss. Suddenly, there was the creak of a door opening, followed by footsteps approaching, and a man's voice asking about the client who had come to sell jewelry, which made Roella jump in panic. A robust man with scars appeared before her and smiled, welcoming her and confirming that she had come to the right place. He then introduced himself as Sharon, the Bastion area manager, promising her a good price. Roella was struck by her hearing. The name Sharon immediately came to mind. Bastion is a dangerous and secretive lower zone of the capital. She remembered what she knew of this place, full of dangerous weapons, unknown plants, and jewelry that was difficult to distinguish between real and fake. She realized she was currently in an area where the law was completely absent and all sorts of illegal commerce were rampant. And the true ruler of this underworld, the keeper of all its secrets, was no one except for the man standing before her, Sharon. Roella remembered the events of the original story, in which Sharon was a very dangerous man who didn't hesitate to take the lives of his customers without mercy as soon as his mood soured. So she turned angrily to the merchant with the mustache, cursing him in his silence for his assertion that his store was trustworthy. However, the merchant glared at her with a malicious smile. Roella realized with horror that he had lured her into this trap, intending to rob his wife of all her precious jewelry. She was pregnant. Sharon asked Roella to show her the jewelry first, making her hesitate slightly, sensing a tension and suspicion at her request. Roella cursed the situation in secret, believing her absolute priority now was to leave the room peacefully without arousing their suspicions about her escape plan. To justify her retreat, she claimed the jewelry held great emotional value for her, and that it would be wrong to get rid of it quickly. Then she excused herself, stepping back towards the door under the pretext that she would think about it for a bit and would come back later. But before she could retreat, a sharp knife suddenly appeared, held near her neck. And Sharon coldly told her that he would take care of it for her if she needed time to think, which struck her with shock and panic. Sharon pointed the knife blade directly at her, a wicked smile on her face, and ordered her to hand over all her jewelry immediately. Roella wondered in terror what he was thinking, protesting that he couldn't expect her to simply hand over her belongings and leave as if nothing had happened. But Sharon mocked her, pointing out that her features confirmed she wouldn't give up. He easily stole the jewelry, leaving her with only one choice. Sharon brandished her knife, threatening to kill her to seize the jewelry by force. Roella screamed in panic, trying to dodge the blow. She closed her eyes tightly, resigning herself to her fate while thinking, alas, her dreams of wealth were vanishing. It had evaporated, and she was going to meet her. To end up in this dark place. But at the decisive moment, an unknown person suddenly intervened and counterattacked Sharon's attack with force, striking him with a blow that made him recoil, and it made him groan in pain. Sharon exploded with anger and gritted her teeth as she sharply questioned the assailant about his identity, wondering if he was her partner's. Roella opened her eyes in astonishment at what had happened. While the mysterious man explained that he wasn't her partner, but simply, "I couldn't stand idly by while a gun was pointed at a woman's face." Roella gazed at the back of her savior, who was dressed in a dark cloak. She wondered, confused, if he had come specifically to help her. And she logically reasoned that anyone wandering in a dangerous place like this couldn't be an ordinary person. And suspicions haunted her that he might be a character from the original novel. Her memory wasn't helping her recognize him. The man turned slightly and ordered Sharon to surrender quietly. And then Roella could see his features with his distinctive red eyes and sword. Then she wondered, in shock, at the prospect of discovering his true identity. Soon, Sharon and the dishonest merchant were tied up. Sharon began to swear and utter threats, vowing allegiance to her savior that he would not get away with it, and questioning whether he thought he would be safe after attacking the leader of the Bastions. The mysterious man didn't care. He uttered threats, but he also drew his sword. Coldly, he challenged him to carry out his threat if he truly possessed the ability to do so. Roella watched the scene unfold, admitting to herself that she had survived certain death thanks to this stranger. But she also remembered that getting involved with strangers without reason could only bring trouble. She therefore decided to exploit this chaos to slip away discreetly, thinking she would thank him if they were destined to meet again. And as she slipped away, the system window appeared directly in front of her face, causing her to stop and flinch in surprise. The window announced the success of a secret quest, explaining that she had met the male protagonist, Hildian, and offered him a sacred relic as a reward while a glowing stone floated before her. Roella was struck by this information and finally realized that the man who had saved her was Hildian, the main hero of the original story. Panic seized her. She completely dismissed the idea, waving her hands to try and push herself away from the window. Convinced that getting involved with the story's hero would cause her countless problems, and wondering why he was even there in the first place, she told herself she didn't need a holy relic or anything grand for all she wanted. She simply wanted to sell her jewelry and return home in peace. But then she paused for a moment. When a sudden idea came to her about the timing of his appearance, she wondered if the male protagonist's appearance at that particular time and the systems involved in the presentation of this reward held some significance. She looked towards Hildian and his bound adversaries. Assuming all these events could be connected in some way, perhaps this gift will be of major importance in the future. Despite her confusion and ignorance of what the days concealed, she told herself, "I'll accept the reward and complete the mission first." The system confirmed successful receipt of the reward, and meanwhile, Hildian turned to look at her out of the corner of his eye. After they left that dark place, Roella thanked her with a broad smile for her rescue, expressing her relief at her survival after she had been lured into that small shop and subjected to intimidation. Hildian noticed the extent. Panic seized her, and she kindly asked him to accompany her until she arrived home safe and sound, which surprised her enormously. Roella laughed tensely and politely declined his offer, explaining that she hadn't even managed to sell him any jewelry, and that the story's hero could subject her to variables and problems she didn't need. She therefore preferred to hurry home alone, and she reiterated her thanks. Hildian respected her wish and wished her safe return. As they parted, Roella noticed strange black dust falling from his shoulder. She wondered, perplexed, if it was simply dust that had stuck to him as they left that place. Roella drew Hildian's attention to the dust on his left shoulder, suggesting he wipe it off, but he looked at his shoulder, confused, and denied there was anything there. Roella was astonished at his inability to see the dust, even though it was perfectly clear in front of him. So she reached out her hand towards him, and offered it to him. She herself brushed things aside with a flick of her wrist. As soon as she wiped her shoulder with her hand, I felt a strange texture crumble beneath her fingers instead of blowing away like normal dust. And this coincided with a sudden pinging of notifications. A system window appeared before her, announcing the completion of the bug removal and the success of the mission, promising her the automatic acquisition of a new skill called Eyes That See Insects, which had struck her. She was extremely shocked. Roella realized that what she had just removed was not dust, but an insect. And she began to rub her arm awkwardly, thinking that the succession of system windows and the appearance of insects made this world seem like a strange game. Suddenly, notifications followed in an annoying pattern, and several windows appeared before her, carrying additional explanations, which triggered her resentment and made her wonder about the cause of the lack of system information, grumbling that the moment was not conducive to reading. While Hildian was trying to talk to him, Roella completely lost her temper due to the numerous windows and screamed, demanding the system disappear. But because the system activated the profanity filter, the words came out of her mouth in the form of an involuntary flirtation, as she shouted, describing him as cute. Hildian was completely taken aback by this sudden outburst and asked her, confused, if she was in charge of this. She had been told about it. Roella panicked and, while secretly cursing, let out a stream of profanities that landed her in this embarrassing situation. She thought about the disaster that had befallen her and how he would misinterpret her words. She tried to smooth things over regarding the stuttering, claiming she was mistaken in her expression due to extreme exhaustion. And when Hildian offered to accompany her again, she firmly rejected him and moved away. She quickly walked off, embarrassed. Roella confirmed she would return alone. She ran off at full speed, trying to escape the situation. Hildian, motionless in his seat, watched. He followed her in astonishment and asked her to wait for him, but in vain. Meanwhile, a man appeared behind him, putting his hand on his chin, thinking of Hildian and smiling slightly, considering that we live to see and hear truly extraordinary things. He turned to him, smiling, while expressing his astonishment at the situation. I've never seen anything like it. He spent 8 years in His Highness's service. Hildian addressed the man as H, who in turn apologized for the surprise, confirming that he hadn't done it. Just imagine finding that girl in this place, H wondered, perplexed, what would drive the saint to come to this suspicious area disguised and concealing his true identity. Hildian raised the possibility that she had come based on a divine revelation, especially since she had secretly carried the sacred relic earlier, which shocked H, who questioned the truth of this matter, pointing out that it explained the cause of his inability to find the holy relic despite his continuous searches. Then he anxiously asked the crown prince, "Is it right to let her go like this?" and reminded him that His Highness was in great need of her. A sacred relic at present, which is why Hildian remained silent, lost in thought. Memory brought Hildian back to reality, when an unknown curse began to spread through his body about 3 months ago, accompanied by a painful headache and extreme fatigue that deprived him of sleep. When he sought the cause of this curse, he discovered the horrifying truth that he was linked to the evil god Ahutib, who had unleashed a devastating crisis upon the Chiros Empire, renowned for its profound faith in the gods. The crown prince's infection by the curse of this evil god was a true catastrophe. It was possible that this curse would create a major stigma, leading people to question his eligibility to take the throne and stirring up whispers and objections among the nobles. Therefore, he decided to hide the dog's presence from everyone except H, and devoted his time to secretly searching for a way to get rid of it. His perilous journey to this region stemmed from his belief that the holy relic possessed the power to lift the curse upon him. Despite this, Hildian explained to his subordinate that, since the relic was now in the hands of the saints, he had no justification for reclaiming it, and he was forced to leave regardless, despite his regrets. H firmly opposed this, reminding her of the terrible suffering she endured because of the curse, and suggested stealing the saint's relic without her knowledge. But Hildian rejected the idea, only to avoid complicating matters further if they were caught, claiming that she could not bear the pain. But at that moment, Hildian stopped abruptly. So Hildian anxiously asked him if the pain had intensified. Hildian denied it, confirming that the opposite was true. He told him that the pain had receded and its intensity had lessened, which greatly piqued their interest. H wondered with astonishment if simply being near the sacred relic was enough to receive its energy and be cleansed of the curse. But Hildian ruled that out, explaining that if the question were true, he would have felt an improvement as soon as he went to the temple. So H wondered what the real explanation was. Hildian then remembered what had just happened, and the moment Rowella reached out and touched his shoulder, confirming the presence of dust trapped there. Realizing that this touch might be the secret to escaping the curse's pain, Hildian questioned her heart, wondering if her abilities as a saint were the true reason for this soothing of her pain. Meanwhile, H asked Hildian, astonished, if the young woman had always acted like a true saint, pointing. He discovered what he had heard about her, rumors. Hildian's constant evasion of responsibility. Hildian calmly denied this, then instructed his subordinate to conduct another investigation and cautiously search around Saint Rowella's personality. After a swift run towards Rowella, he finally fled the situation. He reached his carriage panting, only to find his maid Jane waiting for him, deeply concerned about his delay. "Rowella," I apologized politely. And when the maid asked her about the jewelry, she went out to sell it. She claimed, flustered, that the merchants hadn't offered her a fair price, forcing her to leave without selling it. The maid suggested selling it elsewhere later, when she would be shocked by her mistress's plan to go out again, warning her of the terrible consequences if the Duke were to discover this secret. But Rowella reassured her confidently with a broad smile, confirming that she had succeeded in sneaking out today, and therefore she would be able to go out tomorrow without anyone discovering her secret. After she returned to her palace, she was startled by the Duke's shadow standing directly behind her, wondering intently about her destination, especially since no outing was planned for her that day. Rowella realized with horror that she had gotten herself into a real mess, and secretly cursed the moment of her boasting that had landed her in this awkward situation in front of her strict father. She tried to justify her position with tension and a confused smile, explaining that she had gone out to sell jewelry to raise the donation funds she had mentioned earlier. The Duke disapproved of her actions instead of sending the servants. She replied that she wanted to do it herself, as a first step to atone for her past mistakes. But the Duke glared at her, full of doubt, wondering deeply if this was the only reason that had driven her to go beyond her limits and venture into the dangerous area of the stronghold. Rowella was struck by her knowledge of her destination, and wondered in confusion and shock how the matter had been revealed despite her extreme caution. He dispelled her confusion, explaining that a message had arrived from the royal palace, stating that the Crown Prince had personally cleared the Bastion area the previous day and had seen her there. The message stated that the saint had visited the region alone, without guards, and when she was threatened by bandits, the Crown Prince intervened to save her. The message also concluded that the saint quickly returned and charged with a sacred relic, suggesting that they suspected she was risking her life, and had secretly gone there after sensing his presence. She felt a shock and, at the same time, embarrassment, realizing that concealing her identity hadn't worked before the Crown Prince. As the Duke finished his speech, he expressed his understanding and appreciation for her saintly role in protecting the holy relic. But his tone soon changed to immense anger, as he severely reprimanded her for her recklessness and behavior. Alone in a very dangerous place, I wonder what would have happened if something bad had befallen him, and he had been asked to accompany the guards or call upon him in the future. The Duke pointed his finger at her, emphasizing his orders. Rowella nodded, surprised, though still under the influence of alcohol or drugs, secretly wondering if he was truly worried about her. The Duke's fear subsided, and he offered to take care of the matter. "I'll sell the remaining jewels," he said. So Rowella thanked him with a broad smile, realizing that his reprimands stemmed from her own fears and hoped he would help her, especially regarding the sacred relic. She decided to seize the opportunity and questioned her father about the optimal procedure for handling it. And the Duke replied with confidence that it was natural for her to keep it in her capacity as a saint. Rowella disapproved of the idea in wonder. The Duke then asked her if that is what prevents it. Rowella justified her position by saying that her divine power is weak and her reputation is bad, which could cause concern if she continued. He suggested entrusting it to the temple, but the Duke strongly rejected this, confirming once again that she is the saint and questioning her is considered an insult to the gods and an betrayal of the empire and royalty. The family reunited. The Duke explained that the temple's view of her had begun to change after this incident, indicating a message that arrived early that morning. The message bore the temple seal, and included an official invitation from the high priest requesting a meeting with the saint. Rowella read the message, perplexed. "I wonder why." A sudden invitation, especially since she remembered the events of the novel, and that Rowella's original relationship with the temple hadn't been good at all. The Duke pointed out that she hadn't visited the temple since its official proclamation as a saint and gave her the choice of going or refusing if the matter bothered her. Leaving behind her freedom of decision, Rowella grasped the message, thinking Victor had an impression she had improved. But the high priest and the other priests might not have had the same experience. They changed their minds, however, which allowed her to see that this invitation held a golden opportunity that could not be replaced. Rowella enthusiastically announced her decision to go to the temple. Determined to demonstrate the extent of the change in her personality to improve her declining reputation, she also planned to inspect the wish-built fountain project she had proposed. Indeed, she made her way to the grand temple where the high priest calmly greeted her with a smile, welcoming her back after a long absence, and checking on her well-being before thanking her for accepting the old man's invitation. Rowella replied. She greeted the high priest with a polite smile, insisting that she was the one who should thank him. He invited her in and asked how she was. She thought it was almost their first meeting, so she had to greet him with as much courtesy as possible to make a good impression. The high priest replied in a booming voice, a joyful smile expressing his immense happiness these days, and then invited her to sit. Rowella thanked him and took the seat. He indicated the seat. Once seated, she presented him with a small box, which he opened and revealed to be a luminous stone. He explained that it was the artifact she had recovered from the previous day. The high priest was admired by the sacred aura emanating from the stone, confirming it was indeed a sacred artifact, and he mentioned having heard of her heroic act from the imperial palace, and how she had bravely protected the relic even though her life was threatened by bandits. Rowella laughed shyly and downplayed what she had done, considering it something that didn't deserve all the praise, while secretly wondering exactly what Hildian had said to make it sound like such a grand, heroic act. The high priest asked to examine the relic closely, and Rowella immediately agreed. But as soon as he held it, his expression suddenly changed, and he appeared extremely tense. In a shocked voice, he announced that this piece was not a relic of the goddess Lukira, but rather a relic of the evil god Aotep, which stunned and shocked Rowella. He explained that relics of the goddess Lukira emanate a sacred aura, an aura that purifies its surroundings. In stark contrast, the remnants of the evil god Aotep emit a malevolent aura, and are thus destroyed as soon as they are discovered. Rowella felt a wave of panic rising within her, realizing she had brought something so dangerous directly into the temple, and that this situation would ruin her attempt to leave a good impression, as she had assured everyone that she had intended no harm. However, to everyone's surprise, the high priest's expression changed from shock to intense admiration. He held the relic, trembling, declaring aloud that it was truly magnificent, leaving Rowella completely bewildered. The priest explained his reaction. He clarified that he had thought she had gone there, based on a divine revelation, to retrieve a relic from Lukira, but now she realized that she had gone specifically to retrieve the dangerous relic from Aotep to eliminate the threat it posed. Then, holding the relic, which now emanated a warm light, she added admiringly that she had not yet recovered it, but had in fact already purified it. Rowella wondered in astonishment if it was she who had purified the relic, and the high priest enthusiastically confirmed it, considering her a truly wonderful saint. Rowella tried to remember when she had done that, but she couldn't recall anything. Then a memory from the previous night came to her. She had been wrapping the relic to present it, and she felt a strange warmth emanating from it. She wondered if that moment was part of the purification process. Rowella laughed. I felt awkwardly embarrassed by this praise for an act she hadn't intentionally committed. So she told him she thanked him for his appreciation, but what happened was a mere coincidence. The high priest noticed she seemed somewhat discouraged, even though the evil aura had already dissipated. Rowella seemed heartbroken, unable to lift her head. The high priest believed that the harsh stares of the people and the rumors surrounding her must have deeply affected her, and that her past actions might have been triggered by her discomfort in her role as a saint, and that her true nature was not evil. He saw in her heart that she now possessed all the qualities of a true saint and told her that the purification process is not something everyone can do, and that what she has accomplished is truly remarkable. He then placed his hand on her chest and declared with absolute confidence that she was undoubtedly a wonderful saint, and that he guaranteed it in his capacity as the high priest. Rowella was confused by his sudden seriousness, thinking to herself that she had said all these things as a safety net so that later, if she were unmasked as a false saint, she could say that she had told them from the beginning. She nervously thanked him for his exaggerated praise. While the high priest thought that words alone might not be enough to encourage her, an idea, a glimmer, shone in his eyes, and he wondered if there was something that could show people, saints, miracles, and even change his own view of herself. He stood up abruptly and asked if she would have said it with enthusiasm. She mentioned that she would build a wished restoration fountain, to which Ruella replied in the affirmative. He suggested holding a ceremony to dedicate the fountain so that on that day she could show him a new version of herself for all to see. Ruella hesitated, wondering if people would avoid attending if they knew it was she who had built the fountain, and suggested she take a look behind the scenes. But Victor enthusiastically supported the high priest's idea. And the high priest rejoiced at her agreement. The high priest approached her with even more fervent enthusiasm, asking her to focus on completing the fountain, and that the temple would take full responsibility for organizing the ceremony for her, making it impossible for her to refuse. Ruella. She smiled secretly. She had originally come to the temple to talk about the fountain. But she hadn't expected them to bring it up first, and with such enthusiasm. So she reluctantly agreed. Let them do it. I wondered if everything was all right. Ruella felt a great sense of relief. She had worried about how to promote the fountain after its construction was finished. But since the temple would be managing the ceremony, it represented an enormous burden. Ruella thought that this affair not only saved her life from a lot of trouble, but as she showed it, everyone would notice how much she had changed. That day, it would also help improve her reputation. Consequently, she began planning what she would wear, and what she would say at the ceremony. But while she was lost in thought, a familiar sensation, a voice called to her mockingly. Ruella looked up in surprise. By the owner of the voice, who expressed his astonishment at seeing her in the temple, a place where he never expected them to meet. It was her cousin Helena standing before her with a forced smile, provocatively asking her why she was there, reminding her that she had always hated coming to the temple. Helena continued her mocking remarks, wondering if she had been summoned again because of her harassment of the priests. Ruella calmly replied and asked her in turn why she was at the temple today despite it having no connection to that. But something caught Ruella's attention. Her gaze fell upon the priest standing beside Helen. Her eyes widened in surprise when she realized his identity. At first glance, she thought he was Morgan Cyber, the con man they were looking for who had swindled her. But she quickly corrected herself, realizing he was her older brother, Owen Cyber. Owen stepped toward her and bowed. Politely, he greeted her, saying that he hadn't seen her in a long time, and offering apologies on behalf of his younger brother for the great offense he had committed against her. Ruella frowned in annoyance, remembering that she had indeed heard that the Earl's eldest son had become a priest. Her memory returned to what she knew about him. He had been on the verge of being expelled from his family because of his gambling addiction, but he was sent to the temple because he possessed a divine power. And then she remembered how he had completely distanced himself from his brother. Ruella told Owen that she preferred he not talk about his brother and the others, and he remarked sarcastically that he had committed another offense. Ruella looked at them both, wondering why Helena was with that man, but staying with them would only worsen her mood. Meanwhile, Owen apologized on Helena's behalf, saying she'd been a little harsh. The couple completely ignored Ruella and began whispering. So, she felt resentment towards their childish behavior and decided to move on and ignore them. She turned to leave, announcing that she was going now. But Helena suddenly grabbed her arm and begged her not to go and to help them, revealing in a worried voice that the spirit beast had escaped. Ruella stopped abruptly and turned to him. She was in shock, asking what this spiritual beast meant. Helena explained that Father Owen had opened the door of the sanctuary to show her the beast, but it had slipped through a small crack and escaped in an instant. Helena looked tense. She said they were desperately searching for it. But in searching for this, the vast temple was difficult for them to grasp alone. Then she asked Ruel, the saint, to help them with her power, which Ruela's eye lit up when she thought that the spirit beast was a sacred creature directly managed by the temple. She wondered how they were going to handle it with such negligence. Ruela was seething inside. First of all, Helena was now asking for his help in finding him, and she was wondering what was wrong with these people. Owen intervened, addressing Helena, saying that he understood her feelings, but it would be difficult to ask this lady for help. So, Helena asked him why. Owen explained with a sly smile that the spirit beast is extremely wary of those with weak divine powers, and since the lady didn't have them, but was able to properly demonstrate her power, it would be impossible for her to manage the situation. He added that they should be more attentive to her feelings. Although it was clear they were both mocking her, Ruela was furious, fully realizing what was about to happen. They were implying she was just a hollow saint with weak power, and only wanted to be an obstacle to the search for the spirit beast. Helen pretended to defend her, saying the priest only had her best interests at heart. The interest, and Owen replied that if the lady understood it that way, it was her fault. Ruela sighed inwardly, realizing that these two were perfectly aligned when she started to taunt her. Ruela noticed that many priests were observing the situation, and she thought she would like to ignore the spiritual beast and everything else. But the presence of all those witnesses made it impossible, and she realized that this was exactly what Helena was after. Ruela thought Helena had orchestrated this situation in front of everyone, so she couldn't refuse. If she refused her request, or even if she accepted and failed to find the beast, it was clear she would once again find herself drowning in malicious rumors. Ruela sighed in frustration and realized she had no other choice in this annoying situation. Ruela accepted their request, saying she would help them, which surprised Helena and Owen, who hadn't expected her to agree so easily. Then she added with a confident smile and a condescending tone that she would graciously extend her benevolence to these two miserable souls and help them find the spirit beast itself. After making her big promise, Ruela began wandering the temple gardens, searching everywhere. But she soon wondered, confused, where she was supposed to be. She searched for all she knew about this beast. It took the form of a cat. She remembered one of her lessons where she learned that spirit beasts take the form of cats and are managed by the temple, and that cats are gentle. She was sitting by one of the stone basins. I feel frustrated. She had already searched high places like trees because cats love them, but found nothing, and I started to regret accepting this bet. She remembered how Owen had challenged her. He said he wouldn't be gentle with her because she was the saint, and the one who failed to find the beast must have them admit their incompetence and resign. And how, in a moment of anger, she had accepted the bet without thinking. But she quickly gathered her resolve and decided not to give up and began thinking about other things. I wonder if it isn't rather the cats. Love, excluding the idea of Kanchuna existing in this world. Here, she remembered the existence of a certain plant that resembled what she was looking for, and she tried to recall its name. Her eyes sparkled when she found the plant before her, realizing that it wasn't simply a similar plant, but real catnip, the plant that cats adore. And a sign nearby warned not to touch it, because it was meant only for spirit beasts. A broad, triumphant smile spread across her face, and she felt certain she could win this bet. Meanwhile, Owen and his priests were exploring another part of the gardens, but found nothing, which only fueled Owen's curiosity. Anger and frustration. Owen shouted angrily at the priest, ordering them to hurry up and look elsewhere, and find the spirit beast before the saint had done it. Owen, standing there, cursed the spirit beast that had escaped and done difficult things, and wondered anxiously if the woman would find him first. His memory returned to the moment when his father had reprimanded him for wasting his money and ordered him to go to the temple to become a priest. He remembered his father's warning that this was his last chance. So he clenched his fist maliciously, thinking that he couldn't allow the two brothers to be expelled from the count's house because of this woman, and vowed to teach her a lesson this time. Meanwhile, Ruella had placed an empty box near the catnip plant. The scent inside attracted the spirit beast, which appeared in the form of a magnificent cat and leaped inside. With a triumphant smile, Ruella pounced on the cat and caught it, declaring that she had finally captured it. She held the cat in her arms, thinking that cats do indeed love canned catnip, then, addressing the cat, said that she was the one who had escaped from the sanctuary, and asked it to come with her. Ruella noticed that the cat remained calmer on her lap than she had expected. The cat began to purr and rub against her. Ruella wondered if Helena was right, that the beast hated weak people. Divine power was just a deception. Ruella was grateful for the cat's calmness and decided to now go and strip Owen of his priest's robe and win the bet. Meanwhile, one of the priests was running towards Owen, shouting that they had found the beast. Owen rushed forward eagerly, asking where it was. He came upon Ruella holding the cat in her arms. The priest told him that the saint had already found the spirit beast. Ruella calmly asked him if this was the child he was looking for, expressing her joy at having found him so quickly. Owen was shocked and asked her how she had managed to find him. Ruella innocently claimed that she had simply been standing in the garden, and that it had happened all by herself. And one of the priests remarked that the beast had probably recognized the saint. Owen exploded in anger, shouting and demanding to know if that made sense, since the priest had said, "I've searched the entire temple and found nothing. Find him." Ruella took a step toward him and reminded him of her earlier words about how the spirit beast distrusts those with even a small amount of divine power. Then he lifted the cat towards him and said coldly, simply replying that he hadn't been chosen. Suddenly, the spirit beast turned and attacked, emitting a dark aura, as it growled and clawed at Owen. Owen cried out in pain and terror. Ruella once again held the calm cat in her arms and asked with obvious sarcasm if it was painful for him to see someone with insufficient divine power. Then she gently reassured him that everything was fine. "It's better now." The priest present began murmuring in admiration, expressing their surprise at not having been able to find the beast, no matter how they searched for it, and yet it had succeeded. Not only that, but they noticed how easily she calmed him, leading them to recognize her as the true saint and marvel at the greatness of her divine power. Ruella calmly announced that she would take the little one back to the sanctuary herself, justifying herself by saying that it would be a shame if someone else got hurt again because of this. A clear reference to Owen. Then she turned to him with a sly smile and asked mockingly if she had said anything pointless, especially for someone who was no longer a priest. Owen fell to his knees, trembling with rage and humiliation, secretly cursing that detestable girl, Lady Ruella. Ruella reminded him that a bet is a bet, but added a veiled threat, wondering what might happen if the high priest discovered they had neglected the handling of the spirit beast. She then added with a confident smile, "They must have been incredibly lucky. I ran into her by chance in the hallway." She addressed her speech directly to Helena, who was frozen, and asked her if she was right, which caused Helena to back away. Helena tried to hide her confusion with a nervous laugh and stammered, "Of course," and I thanked her for her help. Ruella didn't appreciate it. "Thank you," she thought, seeing Helena's forced smile, which she must have felt humiliated and frustrated because things hadn't gone as planned. As she walked away, she stopped to offer Helena one last piece of advice. She should try something like that at least once. She approached her and whispered in her ear that knowing one's own weaknesses and asking for help, having nothing to reproach oneself for, was key. She was then asked if she understood. Ruella smiled secretly as she walked away, thinking this lesson would help maintain calm for a while. Then she gave her one last warning. That she would leave now and that it was better for Helena to stop the senseless behavior, to be quiet from now on. After her departure, Ruella began wandering the temple carrying the spirit beast, but she was surprised because she could not find the refuge Victor had mentioned anywhere. She looked at the cat in her arms and was jokingly asked if it knew where the sanctuary was. Then she scolded herself for her foolishness. How could she talk to a cat and expect an answer? But at that moment, the cat jumped out of her arms. The cat suddenly started running. So Ruella let out a cry of surprise, asking where it was going. Ruella hurried to catch up with her, amazed by her sudden run, after he had remained motionless and silent all this time, wondering if he really knew the way to the sanctuary. They asked to slow down so they could leave together. She felt angry thinking about how difficult it was to catch the spirit beast, and that if she lost it now, she'd end up like that fool, Owen. She decided that must never happen and continued chasing the cat, asking it to wait. She stopped abruptly, panting, realizing she had run after the cat without thinking, and now she didn't know where she was. She found herself in front of an old crack in a building covered in vines, and I wondered, perplexed, if such a place existed in the temple. She felt anxious. If she didn't find her way back soon, she would surely get lost and wonder, in the midst of it all, where that cat had gone. She heard a meow and I saw the cat's tail disappear down one of the corridors. She ran, rushing towards it, shouting that she had found it and told it to stop running, but she stopped short when she saw the cat sitting next to someone lying on the floor, and she cautiously wondered about its identity. Her eyes widened. She was extremely shocked when she recognized him. Her features, realizing he was the crown prince. Let's go back an hour, to the highest level. In the priest's office, he apologized to the crown prince, explaining that there was nothing he could do to resolve the problem. The high priest explained that he did not know the nature of the curse, but even his divine power was ineffective, and that the matter could not be underestimated. Despite this, the prince asked for his help, explaining that even if he could not remove the curse, easing the pain would be enough. The solution was discreetly suggested to the high priest that the saint might be able to help, pointing out that she possessed the power of purification. So, Hildian asked in surprise if he was referring to Lady Ruella. The high priest confirmed this and told him that she had come early that morning and shown him an artifact she had retrieved from Bastion, which turned out to belong to the evil god Aotep, and that she had already purified it. Hildian repeated his words in shock. Then, the high priest explained that if she truly possessed this divine power, she might be able to significantly suppress His Highness's cursed actions. Based on this, the high priest suggested that His Highness had tried to seek the saint's help. Later, the crown prince was alone, thinking that the disappearance of the pain lasted for a few moments, the last time, it wasn't a simple coincidence. But the question of whether he could trust her enough to tell her the truth about her curse was It was quite different. Suddenly, the pain struck him again with force, and a dark aura spread around him as he clutched his chest, racked with agony. He was dizzy from the intensity of the pain, desperately thinking that he hadn't brought H with him, and that if he lost consciousness here, he would be in real trouble. He tried to resist the pain and force himself to stay awake. But finally, he collapsed and lost consciousness. At that moment, Ruella found him lying on the floor. So, she rushed to him, shouting, "Wake up." She touched his forehead, noticing the cold sweat covering his face, and anxiously asked him if he was okay, and where the pain was. The crown. The prince slowly opened his eyes and, recognizing her voice, wondered, amidst confusion, if she was the saint. He asked her, astonished at the reason for her presence there, and she replied, confused, that this was not a dream, and it was she who should be wondering why he had collapsed in this place. He tried to get up, but writhed in pain, causing panic in Ruella, who called out to him anxiously. Ruella realized she couldn't carry him herself, so she decided to call for help. But before she could leave, he firmly grabbed her wrist to stop her. He remembered the pain he had felt in his body. His breathing calmed and became easier when he was near her last time, and he wondered if that was truly his power. A saint. He begged her not to leave and asked her to touch him. He repeated his plea, which struck Ruella with profound shock. She wondered, stunned, what this kind person was saying. Affected by the filter of euphemisms, even in her thoughts, and the idea that he seemed perfectly normal before, but now she saw him, calling him a complete pervert. She scolded him, asking if he realized the state of her body and that this wasn't the time for jokes. But he interrupted her, insisting that this was the reason he was saying it, and he at least asked her to touch his back. Ruella wondered, perplexed, if he was asking her to massage his back to relieve a minor pain, like mothers do when they say, "A mother's hand is a healer's hand," and rub their child's sore tummy. Although she thought she could do it. She wondered then if it would be better to call a doctor right away. She told him he would do as he asked, but he had to let her take his hand first. As soon as he fell to the ground, she saw that insect. She had already seen it once on his back. She wondered with terror if this was another mission, but I was surprised that the status window wasn't appearing anywhere. However, she sensed there was something strange about this insect. She wondered anxiously if it had been this large the last time she had seen it. While the Crown Prince was gravely ill, grief overwhelmed her, and her memories returned to the events. From the original novel, Hildian suddenly begins to suffer from a curse of unknown origin. Eventually, the curse consumes him, causing him to lose his mind and transform into a state of rage and madness. Ruella made the connection between the events, wondering, as she thought of the insect she had seen on her shoulder the last time, if that bug was related to Hildian's. A curse. Ruella stared at the strange insect perched on the Crown Prince's back, and a terrifying thought crossed her mind. If her conclusion was correct, and she left the insect alone until it lost its mind, then this would inevitably lead him to the same tragic end. And the bloody end that befell her in the original novel. But she quickly brushed her teeth away at those thoughts that came to her mind, convincing herself that the question of her outburst was a future problem, and she simply couldn't ignore someone suffering right before her eyes now. So she asked him to wait a moment and held out her hand to him. Ruella gently placed her hand on his back, and within moments the black insect began to fade and disappear under her touch. She smiled with relief at the success of the operation. She asked him, her voice filled with concern, how he felt now and wondered if he was all right. While the Crown Prince was still kneeling, gazing at her in astonishment, Hildian slowly rose, signs of relief on his face, and he sighed deeply, confirming that he felt better and more stable now. He took her hands gently and gratefully, looking directly into her eyes to thank her for her help, which caused Ruella surprise and tension. Ruella took a step back. His timidity and confusion, due to his suddenness, made him approach and stammer that it was. Fortunately, his condition wasn't serious enough to call a doctor. At that moment, the familiar voice of the system echoed in his room. A head clicked, and a bright blue window appeared before him, diverting his attention away from him. The window announced the success of his secret mission by removing the insect from Hildian's back and awarded him 3 reputation points. Noticing that the target's pain had lessened, Ruella realized that her pain was indeed linked to the insect, and the word faded, meaning the curse hadn't completely disappeared. Disappeared. She looked at it again, thinking that as long as the insect had been removed for the time being, it should be in good condition. She contemplated its features after it had regained its posture and adjusted its appearance, noticing it was clear that color had returned to its face, and it looked much better than before. She thought of the disastrous consequences that would have occurred if she hadn't come here by chance, searching for the spirit beast, and how Hildian would have faced the danger of being unleashed here alone, or perhaps worse, dying alone in such a desolate place with no one by her side. A destiny she felt deep in her heart. I never wanted to see this. Ruella broke the silence and sincerely asked him to turn to her if the situation ever happened to him again, although he was surprised at first. He nodded as she secretly confessed that she wasn't a doctor, but she would do her best to help him. Ruella then wondered why the Crown Prince was alone in this isolated place, without guards or servants, and curiously asked him if he was on a secret inspection mission. Despite realizing that his luxurious clothing didn't fit this hypothesis. Hildian looked away somewhat embarrassed, then renewed his thanks to her and politely asked her to keep the question of his presence there a secret. This surprised her and prompted her to ask why. He explained that this abandoned temple was a place he had discovered by chance in his childhood, and that he used to come here from time to time, whenever he wanted to clear his head. Because it was a place where no one went, he preferred it that way. To remain unknown to others. Ruella smiled and considered this place a secret. He thought he had a base, She had a good side and had promised him she wouldn't tell everyone. So, he sighed in relief. She thanked him before asking the question. And so why was she there? She was shocked. Like a thunderclap in response to her question, her eyes widened in terror as she remembered the question of the spirit beast, which she had completely forgotten amidst these events. She turned frantically and panicked, right and left, searching for the beast, telling Hildian it was here just now, wondering where it had vanished to and praying that it hadn't run far in that short moment. In the midst of her search, the cat slowly appeared behind her. She dressed and lay calmly on the grass, as if nothing had happened. Ruella quickly picked it up and held it joyfully aloft, thanking it for not running away, while Hildian remained stunned, wondering why a spirit beast was present in this place. Ruella laughed awkwardly and explained that she had gotten lost and ended up here trying to return the beast to the sanctuary. Hildian silently contemplated the situation, remembering that spirit beasts don't follow people easily. But this beast seemed perfectly at ease in her arms, as if it were following its true owner. While Ruella was petting the cat and telling it was time to go home, Ruella asked the Crown Prince, come on, if he knew the location of the creature's spiritual sanctuary. He replied that he had only heard of it by name, inside the temple, and didn't know it was so unknown to everyone. Ruella sighed. She was despairing and realized she would have to question the high priest, thinking she hadn't expected to see him twice in the same day. The day after her discussion with him about the sacred relic and the fountain ended, which made Hildian pay attention to the word fountain. Ruella announced she had to leave now and anxiously asked if everything was all right. Alone. Hildian apologized for keeping her there all this time and reassured her that his assistant was waiting outside, asking her not to worry about him and to continue on her way. Ruella looked at him hesitantly, wondering if it was really safe to leave him alone, but she noticed again that his skin had regained its freshness. She concluded he would be fine. Ruella was forgiven. He returned carrying the spirit beast. Hildian stood where he was, watching its silhouette move away. Hildian regained his composure. After the pain subsided, he looked calmly at Ruella, assuring her that he was at peace and expressing his hope that he would have the chance to meet the saint again soon. After Ruella returned to the Duke's palace, a cry suddenly arose from one of the maids, who was surprised to see a small creature yawning, wondering in astonishment what this thing was. The maid, Jane, was there. She placed her hands on her flushed cheeks in intense admiration, expressing her extreme affection for the cuteness of this creature, to the point that she felt her heart would stop, especially at the sight of it yawning and rubbing its eyes innocently. Jane addressed her mistress, expressing her surprise, for she hadn't expected, lady, to go to the great temple and return with a cat, and Ruella replied that she too hadn't expected it to end like this. Ruella sat stroking the cat with a gentle smile, trying to think of a suitable name for it while reflecting in her heart on the strange circumstances she never would have imagined would bring a spirit animal into her home. Her memories returned to what had happened in the temple. After she managed to catch the beast, she returned to the high priest to ask him for directions to the sanctuary, but he received her with extreme admiration, praising her greatness as a saint and confirming that in all his years of service, he had never seen a spirit beast follow someone with such intimacy and love. Ruella pointed out to the high priest that the beast's spiritual condition didn't seem good. The priest explained that normally, the priest in charge provides the beast with divine energy every week to prevent it from weakening. When the high priest asked about the person's identity, it turned out to be the priest in charge, Owen, which made Ruella seethe inwardly. Realizing that the negligent priest had completely abandoned his responsibilities towards the sacred creature, the high priest tried to reach out. He reached out to restrain the beast, but the small creature lunged fiercely at him and made an angry noise when it touched the priest. Ruella gently drew the beast into her lap while the high priest noticed that the creature rejected his touch as well, explaining that restoring its depleted divine energy required pure sacred power. To Ruella's astonishment, the high priest politely asked if she could take charge of the spirit beast's care for a while. Ruella tried to stammer out a refusal, but the high priest interrupted her with a confident smile, reassuring her that his great abilities had allowed him to easily care for the spirit beast. With a broad smile that brooked no argument, the high priest announced the transfer of the spirit beast's guardianship to the saint, expressing his complete trust in her and dependence upon her. Back in her room, Ruella stood there, contemplating the situation, realizing that she had officially become responsible for this foolish spirituality. But she convinced herself that this affair could prove advantageous if it helped to enhance her status and reputation within the temple. Jane asked her if the Duke had agreed to keep the creature in the palace, and Ruella confirmed that he had agreed immediately and surprisingly as soon as she explained the situation. Ruella remembered how the Duke had tried to hide his admiration for the little creature by coughing slightly and told her with fatherly severity to take good care of it, provided the temple had given its consent. While he was filled with a secret pride that his daughter had earned the temple's recognition for her ability to care for a sacred creature, Jean suggested choosing a name for the spirit beast, noting that calling it a cat or a spirit creature seemed only strange and inappropriate. Ruella. I thought long and hard about choosing a suitable name, deciding on a simple and ordinary one so she wouldn't become too famous or get too attached to it, to avoid feeling sad when party time came. After a moment of reflection, she looked at the little creature and called it Jelly, and the creature responded with a cute little wink and a cheerful meow. Jane was delighted to see Jelly's reaction to the name, considering that the creature liked its new name, and Ruella smiled with relief at the success of the matter. Ruella stroked Jelly's head tenderly and whispered that her stay with her might be short, but she begged him to take care of her during this time. Suddenly, this moment of calm was interrupted by the maid, Marie, bursting into the room. She apologized for her sudden entrance. Marie was panting, carrying a wooden tray with a sealed black letter on it, and said, "Mistress, she must see to this matter immediately, as an urgent letter had arrived from the imperial palace, specifically from the crown prince." Ruella was very surprised to hear the crown prince's name and picked up the letter amidst the whispers of the servants, who wondered curiously why the crown prince was sending them messages, "Mistress." Ruella initially expected the letter to contain only words of thanks and simple greetings related to what had happened between them in the abandoned temple, but her expression changed completely when she read the letter's contents, where the crown prince asked that they meet face to face to discuss certain things in private. Ruella realized with fear and confusion that the arrival of an official letter from the imperial palace with this content meant that the crown prince was extending an official invitation for her to come to the palace. The crown prince explained in his letter that he had learned of the donation fountain project by chance, that it was about adoption, and that he found himself very interested in this unique method of giving, something he hadn't thought of before. He added in his letter that although he hadn't yet chosen a location, he thought he could build the fountain. I recommend an excellent site, renewing her desire to discuss this matter with her personally. Ruella stood there, holding the letter, lost in her confusion. I wondered how the news from the fountain had arrived. I reached her so quickly. Although she admitted she hadn't yet chosen the site, she didn't understand why the crown prince had gone to such lengths to help her. Ruella wondered, in her confusion, what the crown prince could possibly gain from this offer. Suddenly, an idea came to her. She wondered if he was testing her abilities to break his curse. She remembered how her pain subsided significantly when she touched him that day. She therefore concluded with the certainty that his offer of help in the fountain project was merely a pretext. He could use his power to rid himself of the curse that was draining him. Despite this, she felt anguish gripping her heart, for she realized she was capable of removing those tiny insects. But it didn't work. They represent a radical solution to the problem. And ever since she realized she feared that the truth was just a false saint. It had given her false hopes. Her thoughts were interrupted by the curiosity of her two maids, who eagerly questioned her about the contents of the crown prince's letter. She calmly replied that it was simply an invitation to meet and talk. The two servants were overjoyed and, with dreamy expressions, taken in by the crown prince's imagination, took a liking to their mistress and invited her personally, while Ruella completely rejected the idea. Certain that her interest lay solely in his power, the two servants persisted, asking. I wondered with curiosity if she would accept the invitation, as Ruella sank into the depths of thought. A confident smile spread across her lips, convinced that whatever his offer, after all, she had nothing to lose. She saw that accepting this invitation was a smart way to expedite the completion of her tasks, and that there was no justification for refusing. With enthusiasm, she announced to her two children, I'm going. The servants agreed to go and asked them to bring paper and a pen to write a reply. The next day, Ruella made her way to the crown prince's majestic palace. There, she bowed gracefully to Hildian, greeting him respectfully, and introduced herself as Duke Brea's daughter, thanking him for his kind invitation. Hildian returned the greeting with a welcoming smile, confirming that the thanks were indeed for accepting the invitation, and then beckoned her into the palace. Ruella accompanied him inside, thinking this was their third meeting, but she admitted to herself that there was some tension since it was their first official encounter. Hildian noticed her frequent glances, so he stopped and asked her, surprised, if something was wrong or if he had something stuck to his face. Ruella realized she might have stared at him too long. She corrected the situation with a soft laugh, expressing her delight at meeting him privately. This was what gave her that appearance. Her response confused Hildian, who coughed slightly, trying to hide his shyness, making Ruella wonder if she had said something strange. That was what had triggered this interaction. They were sitting together around a table laden with sweets and tea. Ruella initiated the conversation by asking about his affairs, and he confirmed with a smile that he was fine, renewing his heartfelt thanks for her great help that day. She asked him if her invitation was considered an expression of gratitude for this turn of events. And he calmly replied that things weren't necessarily that way, but rather that he knew her sincerity, her intentions, and her desire to support her noble projects. Ruella secretly thought his way of speaking sounded traditional and a bit cliché, but she smiled broadly and told him that his project wasn't so great, thanking him for his great appreciation of her efforts. Hildian then spoke about the project, asking about the site she intended to choose for the fountain, and suggested the Venom area, explaining that it was a commercial zone located on the edge of Bastian's backstreets. Ruella shuddered as soon as she heard the name Bastian and remembered him. The scary gang leader. So Hildian nodded, confirming that it was the same place. They met for the first time. He began explaining that this area had originally been a hub for merchants before criminals flocked there and transformed it into a black market. But he reassured her, saying that after capturing the region's leader, Sharon, last time, the imperial family was currently working tirelessly to revive trade and security in the area, promising her that they would restore her to her former prosperity and even surpass it, and asked her not to worry about it being a bad site. Ruella listened to his reassuring words and was certain that he had indeed invited her to discuss the fountain project and offer his help. Deep down, she didn't care. Regarding the view of the fountain, for everyone, what mattered to her was finishing the construction. However, she feigned hesitation and explained the difficulty of giving him a definitive answer at the moment, prompting him to wonder about the reason. She justified her position by saying that she didn't know the Venom area. It's fine, and this is her first visit. A quick visit to Bastian wasn't enough to judge the whole place. She confirmed to him that this project was of paramount importance to her, and therefore preferred to conduct an on-site inspection before making a decision. He asked her to provide the exact location so she could visit it herself. The prince agreed with her point of view, confirming that she was entirely right, and that this matter was too important to make a decision without first inspecting the site. Based on this, they suggested that they had discussed the details after seeing the site, and offered to arrange another appointment for him personally to guide her there, which triggered Ruella's surprise when she entered. I would be surprised if His Highness actually did guide her himself. Ruella tried to excuse herself politely, explaining that she could go alone and that he didn't need her, His Highness, to waste her time, but he insisted on his position. He justified it by saying that it was he who had suggested the question in the first place, and that was right. He made the first move, confirming that trust is an essential element in any transaction. He repeated his request that she let him guide her. So Ruella hesitated, thinking about his offer. Deep down, Ruella saw that she had nothing to lose by accepting. Rather, she felt a certain fear about walking alone in that area, for fear of being exposed to a situation like what happened to Sharon. Therefore, having made her decision, Ruella bowed slightly and told him she would be under his protection, as she had seen him there. There was no real reason to refuse, and getting help could be useful. So, the Crown Prince promised her with a smile, leaving her to handle the situation. Ruella announced that she would be taking her leave now, and that she was looking forward to their next meeting. As she was about to leave, the Crown Prince offered to accompany her to her car, but she told him there wasn't one and that it wasn't necessary for him to go that far. But suddenly, Ruella stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened in shock as she noticed a small black insect on the Crown Prince's shoulder. She cried out, wondering if it was. This was happening again, which caused her extreme confusion. Ruella quickly corrected the situation and put her hand over her mouth, insisting there was nothing there. As her thoughts collided in panic, wondering how the cursed insect had reappeared after it had previously vanished, she secretly compared this insect to the one she had seen when it collapsed in the abandoned temple. Although it appeared smaller in its current size, she was certain its presence would negatively impact her health. So the Crown Prince noticed her distraction and called her by name. Driven by concern, she asked him directly about his current condition. He was therefore surprised by her question, and she asked him what she meant. Ruella concluded from his facial expressions and movements that he had not appeared in a critical role in the same state as last time. But the insect's reappearance in this short time aroused her concern. Ruella was afraid that if she left it in this state, and the insects accumulated and grew, as had happened in the past, the consequences would be disastrous. So, she decided she couldn't ignore the matter. She excused herself for a moment, then suddenly rushed towards him and hugged him tightly so she could touch the spot where the insect was. The prince was completely shocked by her sudden action and called her name in astonishment. He asked her, confused, what she was doing, so she told him, holding him back to wait a moment and remain still. The crown prince's face blushed with shyness as he wondered, what on earth was she trying to do? Ruella reminded him that he was the one who had asked her to touch him last time, and that she was checking on his condition. Then she began touching other parts of his body, wondering if touching other areas would help as a preventative measure, and asked him to relax. The crown prince was frozen in place, safe from extreme embarrassment. Ruella thought this situation would be catastrophic if anyone saw it, so she continued to touch it everywhere she could reach, considering she had to do what she could as a precaution. After she managed to remove the insect, she stepped back a little and was satisfied. Its disappearance, confirming to herself that since it had affected other areas, as a preventative measure, he should be fine for a while. She asked him how he was feeling now, but she was surprised to see his extremely red face and wondered with confusion about the reason for this. The crown. The prince stammered, turning his face. He stepped back, apologizing for not knowing the reason. Then he asked her to walk back a little, and suddenly Ruella realized the truth of what she had done, and her face paled. Panic seized her. She thought she had carelessly touched the body of a member of the royal family, and that she was in such a state. She hurried, she hadn't thought of that. Consequences. She therefore hastened to offer a heartfelt apology, confirming that she had no ill intentions. The crown prince reassured her, though still embarrassed, confirming that he knew she had acted out of concern for her health and thanked her for her care. Ruella sighed with relief and felt grateful for his kind heart, as she had feared he would reject her for her lack of respect. After things had calmed down, she went downstairs, took her leave quickly, and promised to see him again later. It was time for him to show her the show. So, he nodded and wished her a safe trip home. Ruella quickened her pace, thinking she had to escape before the atmosphere became increasingly awkward and embarrassing. As the prince watched it disappear. He was lost in thought, wondering how Lady Ruella hadn't hesitated for a moment before extending her hand to him. And unlike the others, he didn't seem to feel any awkwardness or embarrassment in her presence. In fact, a slight smile appeared on his face as he admitted to himself that this kind of situation wasn't so bad after all. But soon, his thoughts were interrupted by footsteps. He heard them and stopped. He stopped. He heard his tracks when a woman suddenly appeared behind him, wondering about the identity of the girl who had just left. He turned quickly to the woman. She told him she had noticed it was the first time he had invited a young noblewoman to the palace, and asked him insistently about her identity. Annoyance was written all over the crown prince's face. His face flickered as he tried to change the subject, wondering how she had returned when he thought she had gone out today. That woman was none other than his mother, Empress Nikita Kairos. She was a woman far removed from the constraints of traditional nobility, focusing solely on what sparked her interest and what she enjoyed. In her youth, she was known for her free spirit, a personality she had retained to this day. He remembered how she would suddenly announce her desire to travel to see the monuments of a neighboring country, leaving the imperial palace without hesitation, which always caused confusion among those around her. And he had always felt envy towards this figure, who was his exact opposite. The one who barely survived his life confined within the rigid mold of the crown prince. The empress told him that his schedule was over, earlier than she had anticipated, and then sternly ordered him not to change the subject and to answer her question. The empress repeated her question curiously, directing her fan towards him, wondering about the girl's identity. The prince tried to avoid answering, claiming there was nothing worth knowing and that it was merely an ordinary gathering of nobles. He thought in his heart that he had seen his mother's free spirit in a positive light. But he also realized that there was nothing more irritating than becoming the target of her curiosity. The empress was not convinced by his answer and pointed out that he usually told her the details of his official meetings, but now he was trying to cleverly conceal the matter. Then she surprised him with a direct question, asking if the girl was his girlfriend, which shocked him deeply. The crown prince shouted, denying it. It meant a lot, but his mother seemed to be watching him with a sly smile and suspicious eyes. He stammered in an attempt to defend himself, explaining, they had only met 3 times, and that was all. It takes at least 10 meetings to fall in love. And that's when he realized he'd fallen into her trap. The empress jumped at his word, wondering with delight if it meant that if he met her 7 more times. Sometimes, he wanted her to be his girlfriend. Or perhaps it was unrequited love that triggered his extreme anger. The empress burst in. She laughed and told him she would stop, teasing him, but added playfully that despite him being her son, what had triggered her anger was truly delightful. The prince sighed in despair, realizing his mother would continue to harass him. He had been thinking about this for some time, and that no matter her age, she would remain difficult to deal with. But soon his interest shifted, and he anxiously wondered if the saint had managed to leave the imperial palace safely, which his mother noticed. The empress was watching. While he was distracted, he noticed her facial expressions, and he realized that this was the first time she had seen him like this, concluding that he wasn't completely indifferent to the matter. His memory. He reverted to Hildian's childhood, where he had always been afraid of relationships with people, making him hesitant to allow anyone to approach him or for anyone to approach him himself. Therefore, the only person who remained by his side was his assistant, H. The empress sighed regretfully. It was truly regrettable that her son was so handsome and so different from others. But now, after seeing this young woman, he followed her gaze without realizing it. This astonished her. A smile full of curiosity spread across her face, and she wondered what kind of young woman it was who had managed to capture her son's attention, finding the question truly interesting. Meanwhile, on the way back, Ruella sat in her carriage, feeling extremely exhausted. She thought that eliminating the crown prince and the insects had been more tiring than she had expected. She wondered to herself if the exhaustion stemmed from her private and solitary encounter with the crown prince, from having stayed in the same place with such a handsome man for so long. Time is an exhausting thing in itself. She sighed, thinking how much she had to do. The vision problem had been solved, but she still had to find a sculptor to carve the fountain. And because the tension had dissipated, she felt drowsiness creeping over her. So, she decided to close her eyes for a moment, until she reached the palace. But suddenly, the carriage shook violently, waking her as she let out a cry of pain. Suddenly, the carriage shook with extreme violence, causing Rula to lose her balance and hit her head hard against the side of the carriage. She cried out in pain, clutching her hand. His head jerked as the door burst open to reveal the terrified driver, asking questions about his mistress's condition and whether she had been injured. Rule reassured him, saying that she was fine despite the pain. But she asked him sharply and anxiously about the noise outside, fearing a traffic accident. An accident had occurred. The driver began to stammer, trying to explain the situation to her. Outside, a man wearing an orange coat was firmly gripping the hand of a girl dressed in a robe resembling a priest's habit, while the girl screamed and begged him to leave her alone. However, the man falsely accused her of being the one who harassed him first, claiming that she was now protecting herself from rejection by playing hard to get. Although the girl firmly denied this, insisting that she had only picked up something he had dropped. The driver and Ruella got out of the carriage to clarify the situation. As the driver pointed at those who had suddenly jumped in front of the car, Ruella observed the scene with a look of wonder. As soon as Ruella understood what was happening, signs of anger and disgust were visible on her face. She inwardly described the man as despicable and foolish. This situation brought back bad memories from her childhood, her previous life, when she worked part-time in a shop and dealt with troublesome customers. She recalled a careless customer, who misunderstood her professional kindness as a form of personal admiration, claiming she was interested in him when she was actually just doing her job, ringing up his purchases. And she remembered how the matter had ended, her expulsion. Ruella snapped back to reality and told her chauffeur to wait where he was for a moment while she walked confidently toward the source of the quarrel. The man was still holding the girl and threatening to lose leniency if she continued to behave this way, claiming she was blowing things out of proportion unnecessarily without noticing Ruella, who had been approaching him from behind. Behind him. Without warning, Ruella slammed her fist violently into the man's back, near his head, making him stagger under the force of the sudden blow. The man whirled around angrily, clutching his head, shouting in bewilderment at this audacious person who dared to strike him like that, and severely reprimanding her for her lack of proper etiquette with nobles, wondering what kind of upbringing she had received. Ruella looked at him coldly and without the slightest fear, introducing herself simply as a noble lady, asking him provocatively what he was going to do about it. As soon as the countdown began, he carefully examined her face, her features shifting from anger to shock and terror, and he whispered her name, Lady Brea, in a trembling voice, while the other girl stared at her in astonishment. The Count tried to withdraw and correct his course. The situation was faltering, he said. There was no need to introduce himself, but Ruella interrupted him with biting sarcasm, pointing out that he seemed very curious about the methods of an education in the Duke's household, just a moment ago. Then Ruella smiled. A terrifying, menacing smile, as she offered to tell the Duke personally, describing in detail what had happened, mockingly suggesting they go to her house together. Now, let's get to the discussion. The Count's face paled, and he burst into tears. Intense sweating broke out, and he began to tremble with fear at her explicit threat. Unable to respond, unable to bear the situation, and with no more time, he took to his heels, shouting apologies and begging for forgiveness, leaving the scene at a frantic speed while Ruella and the girl witnessed his shameful escape. Ruella wiped her hands and muttered in annoyance that the man had caused all this commotion for no reason, expressing her resentment at the whole situation. Suddenly, she heard a thud behind her. She turned to find the girl had fallen to her knees, and Ruella thought the girl's legs had given way due to the intense panic she had experienced. Ruella leaned towards her concernedly and asked if she was all right. After this unpleasant situation, she offered to help her up. The girl trembled, muttering incoherently, expressing her disbelief at what was an event she never imagined she would encounter here. Suddenly, she grabbed Ruella's hand tightly and shouted the title of saint aloud, much to Ruella's surprise. The young girl raised her head, her eyes shining, and expressed her immense joy at meeting Ruella. She enthusiastically declared that she was Ruella, one of her biggest fans, who froze in her place, perplexity covering her face, unable to understand what she was hearing, and wondering in confusion what was happening. Ruella began by examining the girl's clothes, noticing she was wearing the uniform of a priestess apprentice, which increased her amazement, as she surmised that the temple members should hate her given Ruella's tyrannical behavior in the past. But the young woman continued her speech with unparalleled enthusiasm, holding Ruella's hand, considering this meeting a great honor and glory for her family. She continued to praise Ruella's beauty, who was still as radiant as ever, describing her kind heart, for having saved a stranger like herself from an evil man, and insisting that she was the Holy of Holies. Ruella thanked her shyly and flusteredly, thinking to herself that it was the first time she had received such a welcome since meeting the high priest, making the situation somewhat embarrassing. The girl suddenly remembered something and began to rummage in her pocket. She pulled out a small statue and proudly displayed it, claiming it was a statue she had made herself in Ruella's likeness. Ruella was stunned and asked in shock if she was truly the one who had made the statue, to which the girl replied humbly and shyly that her skills were still somewhat lacking. Ruella took the statue and gazed at it with great admiration, inwardly disputing the girl's description of her talent as insufficient. She saw that the design was sophisticated and the finishing touch was smooth and perfect. Considering it a work of incredible professional skill, Ruella realized she had found the prize she had so long coveted, sculpting the fountain. So, she eagerly asked the girl her name, and the young girl replied with enthusiasm and joy that her name was Hamel. Ruella surprised the apprentice priestess Hamel by approaching her, prompting a gasp of surprise from Hamel, who hadn't expected this sudden movement. With looks of enthusiasm and bolstered by this newfound confidence, Ruella offered to become Hamel's personal sculptor. She realized in her heart that Hamel's talent was exactly what she needed to perfect the statue of the goddess Lukira for the fountain. Considering this meeting a stroke of luck, Hamel was stunned by this unexpected offer, wondering if it would be possible for him to become the saintly sculptor, which Ruella enthusiastically and resolutely confirmed. Although Hamel described the offer as wonderful and expressed her hesitation, she seemed to want to accept it. She apologized to the saint, saying she couldn't, which left Ruella completely confused and wondering about the reason for this sudden change of heart. Her confusion was interrupted through the voice of her driver, who approached her anxiously, suggesting they'll be leaving soon. It was only then that Ruella noticed that she was sitting with a priestess apprentice in the middle of the street, which had attracted the attention of passers-by who began to gather and whisper around them. Ruella realized then that the situation had become inappropriate and inwardly blamed herself for being so dazzled by the quality of the statue that she had completely forgotten where they were. To resolve the situation, Ruella called Hamel and invited her to accompany him to his palace so they could talk comfortably, explaining that she wanted to know more about her. Hamel greeted this with surprise and immense joy, declaring his immediate agreement and ready to follow her everywhere. As they walked, Ruella thought, Hamel seemed to have a very friendly rapport with her personality, but she marveled at his refusal of the job offer. She wondered if there was a hidden story behind his decision. At the Duke's palace, Hamel seemed extremely nervous as she sipped tea with the saint until her hands kept trembling. She felt as if she were in a dream, so Ruella gently asked her to calm down. She didn't want to reveal anything. Hamel asked Ruella if she could talk comfortably. Then I asked Ruella directly why she had refused to be her sculptor. She explained that she wasn't angry with her, but she felt curious because she had expected her to accept after she expressed her admiration and reassured her that it wasn't necessary to answer if the reason was embarrassing. After a brief hesitation, Hamel decided to tell her the truth, considering the matter somewhat. It was embarrassing, but she would trust Saint. Hamel began her speech, explaining that, as evidenced by her clothing, she was a priestess apprentice. But before that, she had been a mage belonging to the magic tower. Ruella was surprised to hear this. She questioned the information and wondered if she even needed it. She was astonished to find out if she truly was a mage from the magic tower. Remembering Hamel, she resumed her former life as a talented mage with vast magical powers and knowledge, where she loved leading magical research in the tower. But life was not perfect, for the mags were so obsessed with their research that they completely neglected themselves. They spent days without sleep, unable to finish their work. As a result of this negligence, the atmosphere in the tower was so filthy that the smell of mold permeated everything. Finally, Hamel couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't stand this repugnant environment. So she decided to leave and ran away from the magic tower. A few months after her departure, Hamel found herself barely scraping by, earning her daily bread by wandering through villages and doing strange and odd jobs. Her money was running out quickly, which made her feel anxious about her future. Hamel realized she couldn't continue like this unstable life, and that she needed to find a stable job soon. As she walked down a street, she noticed a large crowd of people and wondered what it was. She soon found out. The procession of the new saints passed by, congratulating her, only to discover that the saint was none other than Ruella. Hamel reflected as he watched Ruella's procession, where people were begging her to light their way. He concluded that she was the new saint, her incomparable beauty and a divine aura surrounding her. Unlike the mags she had left behind in the tower, an irresistible desire grew in her heart to be by his side, and so she made a fateful decision. Hamel declared in her heart that she would become a priestess. And all of this was for the good of the saint. Thus, having fallen in love with Ruella at first sight, Hamel went to the temple and begged them to accept her as a priestess. This is how she found a stable job, as a priestess's apprentice. She spent happy days indulging in her new secret hobby, sculpting small statues, of which she was proud. Each time, she made a better statue than the last. But she overlooked one important fact. Art doesn't pay bills. She soon found herself penniless. She spent all her money on sculpting materials, becoming poorer than before. As she walked, confused, wondering what to do, and despite her refusal to give up her hobby of making statues of the saint, she noticed an advertisement on the wall. Promising to lend money. His story was interrupted by Ruella's sudden voice shouting at him to stop, demanding to know what had just happened, which had triggered Hamel's astonishment. Ruella was furious when she discovered that the interest rate in the advertisement was 150%. This was an exorbitant and illegal amount, and she anxiously asked Hamel if she had borrowed money from them. Hamel shamefully admitted that she couldn't resist saving the statues, and that she had indeed borrowed money from them. Ruella felt sad and blamed Hamel for her foolishness. Hamel explained that she had been in a state of mental distress at the time, but now she was bound to them after having already borrowed the money, and she couldn't even pay a small portion of the interest. She added that if she stayed with the saint in this situation, it would only harm her reputation. Ruella sighed, and finally she understood the reason for Hamel's refusal of her offer, and grasped the situation perfectly. But she suddenly rose from her seat with determination, looked around, and declared that she simply couldn't give it up. She repeated her proposal once more, asking Hamel to inform her that she would be the sculptor of his fountain. With a confident smile, she promised that in return she would help him get rid of the illegal loan. Hamel was shocked and asked in confusion if she really meant she would repay his debt. Ruella confirmed that she wouldn't just repay the debt, but repay it entirely. However, Hamel refused, saying she couldn't allow the saint to go to all that trouble for her sake. Ruella reassured her, saying this wasn't a problem, but an investment, and such an investment is necessary when recruiting talent. Ruella wondered if Hamel agreed with her, pointing out that they were committing their crimes openly without getting caught, and reporting them must be pointless, which Hamel confirmed, explaining that they had been the subject of several investigations, but in vain. Ruella concluded that they had taken great care to hide anything that could incriminate them, and that was wonderful. She asked Hamel to tell her everything she knew about the money lender, the location, and the interior design in relation to everything else. But Hamel apologized for not knowing much, because she had only gone there to borrow money. Suddenly, Hamel remembered. She said something and said she had seen a man arrive. He was leaving. The man was carrying something valuable, and at first glance, it looked like a document envelope. Ruella's eyes sparkled, and she realized this was the thread she was looking for. She shouted that the place where the man was heading must be where concrete evidence is being gathered. Ruella grabbed Hamel and shook her excitedly, eagerly asking where the man had gone, which made Hamel stammer. Of this sudden closeness, Hamel asked Ruella to take a step back, promising to tell her everything. In another distant place where darkness enveloped an imposing wooden building located in the heart of a